Demon King's castle. A large explosion was heard in the castle on the horizon. A monster with large horns and fire magic mountains, with its mouth and eyes, created destruction, screaming in pain, destroying the area. The black monster with horns fell to the ground. The main character's breath was squeezed in his lungs, and surprise and joy were visible on his face. He, not believing in victory, asked if they managed to do it. The Azul Kingdom rejoiced. The people thundered with joy at the victory over the Demon King and praised the four sages and the hero. The protagonist was shaking. In a place where leaders from all over the world were, delicious food and elite alcoholic drinks were prepared in his honor, which made the man notice how goosebumps ran down his spine. The high-ranking people rejoiced and praised the four sages for saving them from the Demon King. The king of the Azul Kingdom extended his hand to them and declared that they had done a great job, providing invaluable assistance to the hero and defeating the Demon King. Behind the king stood a man in knightly attire. The king addressed the four great heroes. The boys knelt down and responded to the king's gratitude with consent. The man in the dark hood was the sage of the earth. The one in white was the sage of water. The one in the form of fire on the edges of his cloak was the sage of fire. And the last hero with black hair gathered in a ponytail and a beard was the sage of the wind. The king replied that as a token of appreciation for their bravery, he would grant all the sages present a new title worthy of the greatest sorcerers of the four emperors. The protagonist raised his head and was frozen in amazement at such a gift. The man thought that the title Emperor was only worthy of those with noble blood. The hero's success in killing the Demon King was recognized, and they were given the title of Emperor, strictly within the magical world, which made them stand out from other magicians. The reward was worthy of such an incredible result, thought the main character, looking at the crown carried on the pillow. The king called the Sage of Fire and announced that from now on he would bear the title of Emperor of Flame, for which he received verbal gratitude and a bow. The man looked around. The king called the Wind Sage named Eftal. The man jumped up and was covered in sweat. Smiling, the king responded to the boy who was bowing to him and took the crown, saying that from his point of view, Eftal was somewhat inferior to the other heroes, but he would still allow him to take the title of emperor, just like the others. The king placed the crown on Eftal's head, at which the hero froze. Eftal looked at the floor and listened. The king said that from that moment on he too could call himself the Emperor of Thunder. Eftal did not believe his new status and was lost in thought. The hero burst into tears and mumbled about the emperor's magnanimous words towards him. The king turned to the hall and asked the people to applaud the newly minted four emperors. The hall was filled with sounds of clapping and different voices. The nobles clapped their hands and rejoiced, wishing long life to the new emperors. Eftal wiped away his tears and smiled, thinking that the moment had finally arrived after more than 40 years of his life, when his entire path was recognized as the highest status attainable. 15 years later in the kingdom, on a hill far from the castle, the boys called for Mr. Eftal, running up to him. After so long, Eftal had grown old. His hair had turned gray, and old wrinkles had appeared on his face. The man turned to the call of his charges and turned his gaze to them. The boys bowed and thanked the master for his guidance. Eftal told the children to go and have fun while it was lunchtime and said, turning around, that he himself would be watching the demonic weeds that grew behind him for a while. The man sat down and made notes about the plant and began to cast a spell. Eftal suddenly dropped the notebook and began to choke with a cough, covering his mouth with his hand. Looking at his hand, he saw blood and trembled, cursing his illness, because he understood that because of it he did not have much time left. The man was suddenly called by the voice of a young girl. The man shuddered and froze in his previous position. The girl was scared. She was young and had pointed ears, loose hair with two pigtails fluttering in the wind in front, and in her hands she held a magic staff with a tip in the form of a dark stone. She was dressed in a skirt and a cape with gloves that did not cover her fingers. The man became agitated and turned to the girl named Merlin and asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that he was unwell, but he continued to train his magic, and she did not understand why. Eftal, confused, asked her again if she wanted him to take better care of himself. Merlin agreed. During the war, Eftal noticed how a fragment of the demon's castle fell on a girl with a child, while his comrade called him to hurry because the castle was collapsing. Eftal looked at the crying child, wrapped in linen in the arms of his mother, who held the child close to her. The man thought they were dead and wondered out loud if he had really drawn the demon mother and her child into his battle. The girl raised her trembling hand, which scared Eftal. The demon girl turned to the sage. The demon mother, lying in blood, held out her child and said that this child's name was Merlin, and she asked to save her child. The girl left this world, giving up her spirit and letting the child out of her hands. Eftal caught the baby and turned to the girl. Eftal recalled his first meeting with Merlin and thought that she didn't even remember that he was the man who had destroyed her family, but she still looked at him with such worried eyes, filled with care and anxiety. The man with gray hair put his hand on the girl's head and began to ruffle her hair, which made her shudder. Merlin asked the man to stop petting her. The man replied that all his actions were for the sake of teaching talented people like her. The girl became interested in her teacher's words. Eftal turned away from her to the sun and asked what came to their minds when they looked at his back, adding that this was why he strove to become the strongest in the world. The girl asked him again, confused, about the word aspiration. The man explained that if he aspired to become a magical warrior, then it was natural, because anyone would strive for the top, and that was his truth. But the man no longer saw any hope for himself, where he would reach the top of magic. The girl did not understand him and asked with a cry what he was talking about, because her master was more than strong, because he was the Emperor of Thunder, the strongest man and magician in the world. Eftal replied that he was simply the strongest among the weak, but he understood that he was not among the strongest in the whole world until the children called him. Compared to the young and immensely talented, he was weak. The man compared himself, remembering his fellow emperors. The man recalled that even in the battle against the Demon King, he was the only one who fought desperately, being the oldest in the group. Eftal's thoughts were interrupted by a voice announcing the news. The man asked the out-of-breath boy what was going on. The boy replied that the Imperial Flame University had developed a theory about the compatibility of demon magic. Eftal asked the boy in surprise what he had given the letter for. The man began to read anxiously and ponder that the compatibility of demonic magic, which had remained a mystery to them for so long, had become possible. Eftal's eyes widened, and he replied that he saw and understood what method was spoken of in the letter. The man, remembering his comrade, joyfully replied that he had expected such a discovery from him. The children approached the master and asked what they should do. Eftal replied that they would not know until they tried it, and that they should try it, to which the children agreed. Looking at the flasks of water, Eftal replied that they would first test them with Merlin and began to explain how it worked. The man said that they simply needed to take one hair and drop it into each flask from the sample being tested and pulled a hair from his charge's head. Afterwards, he soaked them in 4 special types of magical water. The children began to watch the reaction of the water attentively, their mouths open and their eyes wide. The boys and Eftal, the flasks of water, began to glow blue and green. Merlin looked at the flask and asked what it meant. Eftal replied, looking at the records, that according to the research work of the Flame Emperor, when blue and green glowed, it meant water and wind, and he reasoned that the rank differed in shade according to the color scheme in the Flame Emperor's work. Eftal replied that the girl was an S rank with 2 elements and noted that the other test tubes were brown and red and that this was Fire C rank and Earth B rank. The man thought this was amazing and thought that Merlin did not understand it, but he knew because he had been watching her since she was a child. Magic is divided into 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and wind. Considering compatibility, Merlin was in each of them, and this magical theory was very accurate. In the fundamental courses, the current academies taught students all kinds of magic, and after a long period of time, they determined compatibility. The man thought about what if they could now send a child immediately after admission or even after birth. Eftal, watching the guys, said that he would be the next to conduct the test, pointing his hand at himself. Merlin replied in confusion that there was no need to do such an examination because the gentleman was one of the 4 emperors, raising his finger up. The boys objected to the girl, justifying themselves by saying that they wanted to see the results. The man wanted to check it himself. Eftal replied that he was not against checking himself. One of the man's students replied that his master was one of the 4 emperors, and he was sure of the intensity of the color in the test tube. Eftal thought about it. The protagonist sat down and decided that even if he couldn't reach the peak of magic, he still wanted to know if he had this quality from the start. He dipped his hair into the test tubes. Eftal worked for several decades more intensively and diligently than others, although he knew that other emperors also put in a lot of effort to achieve their status. But even so, Eftal worked more than them. The man's gaze was filled with disappointment and surprise. The tags were not colored in any of the colors, indicating that the man had no compatibility with magic. Eftal's students were surprised and interested in their master's result. They did not understand why the man had no compatibility, because it was simply impossible for the flasks to remain colorless. Eftal became worried. The protagonist panicked and noted in his head that this was indeed impossible, since the lack of any compatibility meant that he would not be able to receive any divine protection from the spirits. Eftal was nervous and did not understand, because he was the Emperor of Thunder. The guy assumed that he and the guys could have ruined the process and suggested that the teacher try to conduct the analysis again. Eftal was happy and agreed with him. Subsequently, no matter how many times they tried, the color still did not appear, causing Eftal to collapse, losing his strength and consciousness. The children screamed, trying to call out to their teacher. Later, Merlin was already in her room getting ready for bed and thinking about Mr. Eftal. A sick cough was heard from Eftal's room. A sign on the door asked not to enter. Eftal lay in his room, suffering from illness alone. The main character was shaking and breathing heavily from the lack of air in his lungs. He finally understood everything, imagining 3 emperors in front of him. Eftal remembered how he could never catch up with his comrades, the 3 emperors, and now he understood that they were always stronger than him, and it didn't matter how hard he tried, the hero always remained behind them. And there was a reason why the color of the water in the flask did not change. It had no compatibility. The man huddled in the blankets and closed his eyes. The hero did not walk that path with such hesitation as to give up because he lacked talent, but unfortunately he could not overcome that wall called talent, and his comrades abandoned him to head for the heights of magic that the hero himself aspired to, with the desire to rise a little higher than him. That's what Eftal thought. Clearing his throat, the man blamed himself, thinking that he was pathetic, but despite this, and if he had more time, he would have put in more effort and achieved his desires. 18 Mind 70s Y Fur. Eftal clutched his chest in resentment and cried, thinking how annoyingly he had lived his life. The man died of suffocation. A blurry system appeared before the man. The system, becoming more clear, showed Eftal a skill called Rebirth. Eftal woke up in a place filled with light, and where the floor was mirrored by guys. Sighing, Eftal tried to get up from the mirror. The man returned to his young business and remembered how 50 years ago he was given this skill. Rising from his knees, the man looked at God and said that this was the place where he had already been for the first time, and his life ended in that world which was different from the current one. The girl kindly told her, "Dear Eftal," the guy in the sky, how long it had been since they had seen each other, and reminded the guy that thanks to his skill of perseverance, he never gave up in the face of his ambitions. The girl smiled and replied that he had made every effort to see it through to the end. The man shuddered and, putting his hand to his chin, recalled how he had strived for one goal all his life. The girl declared that now the 3rd reincarnation of the main character in a new world had come and opened her arms to transfer the guy's mind. The goddess offered the boy to choose a couple of starting bonus skills and go, offering the skill of the strongest person, or doubling the growth rate. The man resolutely refused. Eftal said that he did not need them. The man pointed to his forehead and said that his vast knowledge of magic in his head and the time he had to live was all he needed for his goal. The girl laughed and said that she had expected this, because despite the lack of compatibility, he had managed to achieve the status of emperor, which was not the power of some skill, but his personal willpower. Eftal waved his hands and said that he knew nothing about it. The goddess smiled, understanding the guy, and asked if he was ready. Eftal agreed with him and asked her to take care of him. The girl wished him a happy journey and sent him to a new world. The hero woke up in the body of a small boy with dark hair, sleeping in his room, and upon waking up, he suddenly jumped out of bed with a scream. The black-haired boy grabbed his face and thought his memories were starting to come back to him. The boy looked back. After leaving the room, the guy went down the stairs and did not understand who he was. After going down, he found a mirror and looked into it with surprise. The boy thought about it and realized that he was not some 4-year-old child who suddenly realized who he was. The boy had a feeling that he was gradually remembering that everything that had happened before had never happened. Now the boy understood that he was old enough to perceive the world around him. The guy smiled, clenching his fist, and remembered how he asked the goddess to reincarnate him, and now he decided that he would definitely become the strongest person in this generation. The boy ran to the kitchen and collected all the glassware on the table. The guy closed his eyes and prepared 4 glasses of liquid to test compatibility. He pulled out a few hairs from his head, put the hairs in glasses, and made up his mind, thinking that in this generation everything would surely work out. Eftal looked at the colorless water with a sad smile and said that he already knew this. Even though the hero said he didn't need any skills, he still didn't believe that he didn't even have the compatibility level of an ordinary person. The guy climbed the mountain and thought about it. Collapsing on the grass, the hero thought that if this result coincided with his new life, then there was some kind of limit to growth, and did this mean that after learning 10th level magic, he would reach the limit? Eftal became sad. The boy thought that if it ended like this, it would be the end of him. Raising his head up, he noticed the monster flying. A huge dragon was flying across the sky. Eftal noticed that the monster's eyes were bloodshot and decided that someone had angered the dragon. The boy asked what the monster was doing in a place like this and ran after him. The main character, out of breath, understood that it would be a disaster if the dragon flew into the city because all the townspeople would suffer. The guy stopped and did not know what to do. Eftal realized that he was now in the body of a 4-year-old child and did not understand what his capabilities were if he decided to go there. The city guards noticed the dragon and shouted to drive it away, but the dragon flew towards the royal capital, and the knights understood that they would not be able to defend themselves from the monster. The boy remembered that he should have retained his ability to cast spells after reincarnation, and he decided to use his own spell that he had mastered before his last death. This spell was the highest level 10. The boy raised his hand and looked at it with a sad face and doubted his power as the Thunder Emperor, Eftal. Eftal snapped his finger, and his hand lit up. A magic sphere appeared. The guy was surprised that his magic worked. Meanwhile, the knights held the defense against the dragon. Eftal was able to create a huge ball of magic and tried to hold it in his hand. The boy held back his strength with tears and did not understand why his magic had increased. The protagonist raised his hand to project the magic upward. The knights, noticing the light, did not understand where it came from and froze in surprise. Eftal's magic struck the dragon with lightning, and the monster roared. Eftal fell to the ground and was surprised that he was able to cast it. The guy looked back. The boy quickly stood up and began to run away from the falling dragon. The boy ran forward with tears in his eyes and screamed in fear of being crushed. The guy stopped and turned around. The dragon continued to drag along the ground from the fall towards the guy. There was an explosion. Eftal lay on the ground, shaking, trying to catch his breath from the fear he had endured. The dragon had fallen. There were only a few centimeters left before the boy's legs would be crushed. The main character stood up and looked at his hand, which sparkled with lightning, and reasoned it seemed to him that he was able to be reborn into this world at the age of 4. Looking back, the boy realized that he had managed to save all the accumulated powers from his past life and use them there. Behind the boy, the dragon he had defeated was smoking. Eftal sat at his desk and read a book. Thinking that 3 years had passed since his reincarnation, his mind had become clearer and his consciousness had become stronger. The boy diligently explored the things of the new world and compared them with his past. Eftal looked back and saw the boy talking to a woman. The woman thanked the boy for coming. The boy replied that he could not help but come because the boy was his younger brother and he should not have received thanks. The guy handed over an envelope with a seal and said that it was for this month, although there was not much in it, but he asked to take the money. The woman took it. The woman in the dress and with black hair down to her shoulder blades replied that she would spend it carefully. The guy smiled at her and asked her to use it as she wanted. Eftal watched their dialogue secretly and noticed that she lived with her mother, who was the woman. She had the same compatibility as her son and thus looked like she had been through a lot. The girl laughed happily at the guy's answer and smiled. The man who gave some money for expenses was not the boy's father, Eftal thought. The boy noticed the boy, and he and the mother noticed the child. The boy with the blonde hair was the main character's older brother Fraser, who was the second son of the Duke. Fraser smiled and asked his younger brother if everything was okay with him. Eftal was reborn as one of his descendants. The boy excitedly asked his brother where their father was. Fraser fell silent. The brother apologized to Eftal and replied in confusion that his father was very busy and could not find time for him. Eftal became sad and sighed. The boy knew that his father was the leader of the Order of Magic in the Kingdom of Azul, Duke Elcott. In addition to the Duke's first wife, he had 9 more concubines, and because the main character's mother was incompatible, she was subjected to ridicule and reproaches from the harem. And although Eftal's father was part of the line of leaders of magic, no one knew why he conceived a child with such a woman, and Eftal understood that he was an illegitimate child. The Duke's main wife despised the protagonist and his mother, and therefore exiled them outside the Azul Palace. But the elder brother Fraser, who was the legitimate son, could not just look at them in such a state. Fraser apologized to his brother, saying that he would definitely pass on his words to their father. Thus, the elder brother took care of the hero and his mother, and Eftal considered him a good man. Fraser, sitting down on a chair, asked, clarifying that they did not need anything else. The main character's mother answered that the guy had already helped them more than enough and was going to make them tea. Eftal added that he was also thirsty. The woman poured tea for the boys and warned Eftal that the drink was hot. The hero agreed and began to blow into the glass. Eftal decided that no matter what the circumstances, he would be content as long as he could study magic. Fraser approached Eftal and asked if there was anything he had planned to do in the future. Eftal responded with admiration that since they were part of a legendary line of sages, he had planned to enroll in the Royal Academy of Magic when he turned 15. Raising his hands up, he said that he was going to specialize in research and attribute improvement later. Suddenly, the guy's face was covered by his mother's hands, and the guy didn't have time to finish. His mother said for him that he and she had no magical compatibility. The boy reasoned that at that time, checking the compatibility of magic, which the Flame Emperor had invented, had become a widely known procedure and was as commonplace as everyone knew about the main character's lack of compatibility. His mother said that it would be best for her son to learn fencing. Saddened, the woman said that he then sent Eftal to a military academy. The hero tried to unclasp his mother's hands from his mouth and object to her words. Fraser was pleased with the woman's plan and became inspired. Fraser praised himself with a confident tone, saying that although he didn't look it, he graduated from the military academy with honors. The woman happily replied that she remembered it. The guy recalled that when he was young, he wanted to go against his father and the whole family, so he entered the military academy. Fraser said that he did everything right and chose the right path, because magic swordsmen are rare and therefore he highly valued their armed forces. The guy offered to give a couple of hooks to his brother because of his free schedule that day. Eftal's mother happily replied that she agreed and that it would be great. Fraser taught his brother and told him to hold the sword tighter and encouraged him when he was doing well. Eftal himself swung the sword forward. Fraser happily declared that Eftal was excellent and quite suitable for fencing. Eftal wondered if this was true, since he himself had only just realized it. From his older brother, Eftal had received only general lessons, but for some reason he did not understand. He'd only been taught military strategy. Now Eftal understood that Fraser had wanted his younger brother to enter the military academy from the very beginning. As Fraser talked about fencing, Eftal realized that his older brother was worried about his compatibility. The main character stood up, closed his eyes, and called out to his older brother. Fraser asked what happened and inquired if Eftal was tired. The boy answered in confusion that he wanted to enroll in the Academy of Magic. Fraser looked sadly at his brother and sighed decisively, asking him to listen to his advice, explaining that people have abilities for some things but not for others. The guy mentally answered that he already knew about it. Eftal thought that this is why in the Academy of Magic, after 400 years, there should be hints on how to go beyond magic, and he wanted to figure it out. Fraser replied that he thought about it, and since that was his brother's wish, he offered it to the boy. The elder brother said that he would demonstrate one spell, and if he could somehow repeat it, then Fraser would personally send him to the Academy of Magic. Eftal did not have time to clarify his brother's words whether he was telling the truth and was happy. The boy immediately agreed to Fraser's proposal and was inspired. The elder brother turned away, preparing for the spell, and the boy rejoiced, saying that it was wonderful and that this condition suited him. Fraser mentally apologized to Eftal and knew that his actions might be cruel, but he hoped that he would understand when he saw it for himself. The hero's older brother shouted for Eftal to watch more closely. The boy agreed and watched happily while Fraser began to cast his spell. Fraser waved his arms and called upon the wind spirit Sylph to grant him blessings and strength. He was conjuring the spirit of the gods. Eftal was surprised and opened his mouth. Fraser used Windblade Wind Edge Level 2 and threw a wind boomerang forward. The boomerang from the wind spun and flew forward quickly, rolling through the air. Having crashed into the tree, the spell chopped the plant and broke it with a thud. The boys watched as the tree fell backwards. Fraser tried to catch his breath and turned to his brother in a sweat, wondering if Eftal had enjoyed the performance, because what the guy had managed to do could be called a trial. Eftal raised his hand to his lips and answered whether that was all, and clarified whether there was definitely nothing more required for the condition. Fraser winced at the question. The guide tried to explain that such magic was already complicated while Eftal raised his hand, preparing for the spell. Eftal, without saying a word, created the same spell, only bigger and stronger. The older brother was surprised by his brother's strength. Eftal's magic swept through the forest, cutting down more than one tree. Fraser, shielding himself from the wind, screamed from the force of the gust. The boy turned towards his younger brother and opened his mouth in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Eftal stood there unperturbed, having finished the spell. Fraser thought in panic how a 7-year-old child rolled such a spell, without reading the spell, and immediately understood that the only one who could create this spell was a sage who had accumulated knowledge and experience for decades. Falling to his knees, he did not believe that a 7-year-old child was capable of such a spell, because he had never heard of it. Before the eyes of the older brother was a strip cut down along and a forest around. Fraser, trembling, turned to Eftal and stuttered, asking if he had done such a thing. The boy turned to the guy, embarrassed, answering his brother's appeal. Eftal fussed and replied that he had misunderstood him and that he was very sorry because he had to repeat after him. He justified himself by saying that he had not intentionally used 4th-level magic. The older brother's face twisted and he said, stuttering, that the 4th level of the spell was very high for a wizard. The protagonist froze and mentally asked, thinking that the 4th level was a low-ranking sorcery. Fraser asked Eftal how he did it. The boy did not know what to answer and confusedly said that he could not explain it. Eftal began to lie that he was practicing meditation and that it was because of the power of the spell he had studied before. Fraser did not understand what his younger brother was talking about and apologized and asked him to repeat it. The boy replied in disappointment that if he were in better shape, he would be able to use 10th level magic. The older brother was even more surprised by the boy's words about the 10th level. Fraser's consciousness left the boy, and he answered at last that it was a lost art. Eftal shuddered and shouted to his brother, who was already lying on the ground, asking what had happened to him. The main character began to fuss and thought that in this world he had never shown his magic to anyone, and his older brother's reaction was strange to him, and he understood that something was wrong here. The boy remembered that the reaction when he defeated the dragon was similar to when the knights were surprised by the monster burning alive. The knights thought that they were saved by the gods of that world, and did not understand that the reason for their salvation was a 4-year-old boy, and therefore they called it a divine miracle. The boy tried to wake up his older brother by tugging and calling him. The boy looked around and thought with alarm that something was wrong with this world after 400 years. Eftal sat at home at his desk studying history, wondering what could have happened during the 400 years he had been gone. Closing the thick book with a serious expression, the boy understood and began to analyze. He thought that during this time, magic began to decline rapidly. Eftal compared with the past and looked at the current table, where a big difference was immediately visible. The guy noticed that magic, without reading the spell, stopped spreading, which made him think. The hero understood why his older brother lost consciousness and was shocked by Eftal's spell without words and compatibility, because, in Fraser's eyes, Eftal was a monster. The boy was worried about his actions and thoughtfully said that his older brother suffered because of him. Fraser opened his eyes and jumped out of bed screaming for Eftal. The boy was glad to see his brother awake and called out to him. Fraser was waving his hands around, repeating and stuttering like a 7-year-old child who used magic without words. The boy pretended not to understand what his brother was talking about and asked him what he meant. Fraser winced and looked at his younger brother in surprise. The boy began to explain that when his brother used high-level magic, he knocked down trees and one of them crashed into his head, causing him to lose consciousness. The elder brother grabbed his head and thought, answering that perhaps it was so, and smiled. Turning away from Eftal, he thought that if it were different, he would not be able to explain this phenomenon. Eftal took advantage of this situation, and after that, he secretly practiced magic. But Eftal did not abandon his fencing lessons, and continued to train with his older brother to enter the military academy. Fraser, accepting his brother's attack, shouted at him to continue in the same spirit. The boy, attacking, accepted the words of his older brother and sped up. Fraser dodged Eftal and hit him in the back. The boy did not expect this, and, protecting himself from falling, covered his face with his hands and rolled on the ground. The older brother laughed and replied that the boy had behaved well. Eftal got angry, but kept silent, thinking that he did not want to enter the military academy. Trembling with anger, Eftal began to sweat, and thought that his soul was rotten because of his tenacity skill, so he decided to enroll. The boy believed that the more he lost, the more his blood boiled, so he called out to his older brother, asking to repeat the duel. Fraser was glad of the strength of his younger brother's spirit. New fights between the brothers were similar, but Eftal did not give up despite the defeats and asked for more and more. Standing on a boulder near a waterfall with a sword, Eftal trained and thought that finally, at the age of 10, he would be able to. The boy closed his eyes and sighed, preparing to attack. When he opened his eyes, determination was visible in them. The boy moved as soon as he saw a log falling from the top of the river. The boy swung his sword and cut through the water. Afterwards, he jumped and chopped the log into pieces. Eftal finished his moves, leaving the tree behind him to fall down. The tree shattered into 9 pieces. Landing in the rhubarb with the log, the boy stood on the boulder as the water behind him splashed up from the falling logs. Eftal admitted that since it wasn't magic, he didn't really want to strain himself and turned back to the waterfall. The boy rejoiced at the successful attack and examined the sword, saying that learning fencing was fun and the title of a strong knight suited him. The boy's goal was to become a blade that could surpass magic. Eftal's thoughts were interrupted by his older brother, calling the boy. The hero turned around, paying attention to his brother. Fraser called his younger brother over, offering to start training. Eftal happily moved toward his brother. Fraser trained Eftal 3 times a week. The boy climbed down from the boulder by the waterfall and heard his brother say that he would have a special training session today, which surprised the boy. The elder brother replied that he would not be the teacher today, but a specially invited person for the younger brother. Eftal shuddered. A large foot stepped next to the boy's small shoes. Before Eftal, twice as tall and bigger than his older brother, with a mustache and a bald head. The man asked if this was the young man Fraser had spoken of, to which he was given the answer. Fraser introduced the brute to Eftal, saying that he was a former commander of the Chivalry Order, the Kingdom of Azul, named Mariot. The man looked down at the boy, placing his hand on his chin. Eftal backed away, thinking hard that his opponent was huge and nervous. The man came down to the guy and threateningly declared that everything was fine, asking him not to be afraid and attack him. The hero was taken aback by such a statement. Mariot took a pose and pounded his chest with one hand, while he extended the other and called out, saying he had come to practice with the young man and ordered him to get ready. Eftal stood frozen, not fully understanding what was happening as his brother and the man moved away, adding distance to the fight. The older brother shouted, asking Eftal to do everything he could to win. The young man looked at the brute, scratching his head, and thought, not seeing the enemy's vulnerable or weak points. The guy firmly stated in his thoughts that the man was a strong opponent and was nervous. The man froze in place without turning around, saying that he had not come all this way for the hero Eftal to just stand there. The thug's words angered the main character. But the guy froze with trembling legs and mentally answered that it was not that he did not want to attack, but that he simply could not. Mariot swung at Eftal with a sharp movement, saying that then he himself would come for him. The guy shuddered, not understanding what was happening. Eftal managed to react and jumped back from the attack, protecting his face. Having come to his senses, the guy analyzed that the thug was fast, and he did not see at all when the man swung at him, which surprised the guy. The former commander told the boy that his reaction was too slow, asking if that was all he could do. The boy, dodging the new attacks, replied that in that case he would use something special. Leaping forward towards the enemy, he magically enhanced his physical abilities and swung his sword for his first attack. The man was happily surprised, speaking about the boy's ability to manipulate physical abilities at such a young age, and repelled Eftal's attack. The swords crossed and the metal rang. Eftal began a rapid series of his attacks, but Mariot defended himself from them all. The man was glad that the boy had lived up to his expectations and said that he now understood why Fraser had praised him so much. Fraser agreed, while the boy was distracted by his brother bragging about him. The older brother replied that when he taught him fencing, he did not show the boy these techniques, and a weak magical power manifested in his hands when he held the sword. Fraser recalled a conversation with his brother when he asked Eftal about the control of magical power, to which the hero agreed. Fraser noted that this was a good quality and explained that with the help of the control of magical power, the hero would be able to increase his physical strength in one way. Fraser noted that even if the guy had no magical compatibility, it did not mean a complete lack of magical power, and he began to teach how to concentrate power in one area. Eftal was able to learn to control the magical power of his body very skillfully. Fraser noted that his younger brother could control magic like an experienced sorcerer or sage. Eftal mentally responded to his brother's words that he had been like that before and became proud. The guy quickly returned to the fight, turning his attention to the enemy. The brute, having analyzed Fraser's words, replied that the guy, despite the lack of compatibility, knew how to use magical power as an expert and began to fuss. Eftal twisted his face in sweat and thought that it would be easier if he knew how to use magic. Mauriat grabbed the sword again. The man swung at the boy with renewed vigor. Eftal managed to dodge, leaning back from the attack. Eftal jumped away from his opponent and thought that using such a method on such a person would be simply pointless. The guy looked straight at his opponent, thinking how to win. The guy jumped and decided that right now he wanted to defeat the enemy with the sword. In flight, the hero swung, and the man prepared to attack. The swords crossed again with renewed force, so much so that the air shook before their fight. Mauriat angrily shouted that the guy was weak and threw the boy back with a blow. Eftal held his sword, and the man's sword above himself, defending himself from the pressure of his opponent's strength and acknowledging the severity of the attack with a lack of air in his lungs. The brute declared, shouting at the boy that he lacked technique, height, and muscle, while the ground beneath the boy's feet cracked into pieces. The boy trembled and tried to breathe. The older brother began to worry, watching the duel from the sidelines. The hero's opponent gritted his teeth and replied that the boy was too young to face a man like him in battle. The boy dropped the sword from his hands, and the thug watched in surprise as the weapon bounced off into the sky. The sword spun in the sky under the scorching sun. The man froze, his mouth open, watching the sword. While the enemy was distracted, Eftal crouched down on all fours and prepared to jump on Mauriat. The man noticed the new movements of the youth. The boy grabbed the enemy by the sleeve and tried to turn the adult man around his axis. Mauriat was already looking at the boy upside down in surprise. Eftal spun the man above the ground, taking him in a bend. The guy himself was surprised by his actions. The noise and shaking caused the birds to fly off the tree branches. The protagonist dropped the big guy to the ground with a crash. Clouds of dust flew around. The man lay on the ground, confused, his mouth open, silently staring blankly at the sky. The older brother, clenching his fists, rejoiced at his younger brother's victory. Eftal looked at his hands in silence, not understanding how he did it. The guy decided that his body reacted automatically. The guy remembered that in his first life he used this technique in the ring, and its name was Kumi Waza. Eftal did not even imagine that this technique could be useful to him in this world. The guy happily smiled at his victory. Mauriat laughed loudly at his defeat and specified that the boy was engaged in martial arts. Eftal shuddered at the man's voice. The brute added that he had heard about such things in the East, where everyone knows such fighting techniques, and he was surprised that a 10-year-old child could master them. The man patted the boy on the back and admitted his defeat, and he passed the test. The boy tried to clear his throat while his older brother watched them. Eftal, with tears in his eyes, asked his older brother what test they were talking about. Fraser turned his attention to the boy and replied that he had forgotten to tell him the most important thing. Fraser happily announced that Mr. Murade was the director of the military academy of the Kingdom of Azul. Eftal began to fidget. The boy wanted to say something, but Fraser interrupted his brother by answering that when he reached 15, he would become a student at the military academy, as his mother had asked. Mirai added that he should remember that even though the boy had defeated the man in a duel, he still remained the winner with swords. The boy exclaimed with offense, not understanding what kind of reasoning this was, and finally he shouted how everything had turned out like this with him. The weather was turning bad, and the clouds were gathering. Fraser noticed and noted that it was going to rain. Eftal's mother and her maid were hanging out the washing until the maid asked her mistress to hurry inside before the storm hit. Fraser looked around and, not seeing his younger brother nearby, asked if Eftal was currently training in swordsmanship. Janina confusedly agreed with Fraser while taking off her bed linen and added that she was not against it as long as he did not get wet, asking if Fraser understood her. It started to rain. The main character was training magic using the 10th level of the Thunder Emperor. a magic circle with hieroglyphs appeared in front of the guy's outstretched hand, around which lightning sparkled. Eftal's face was serious and tense. Suddenly, lightning struck a couple of trees from the sky with thunder, breaking the logs into splinters. The guy stood in front of a huge hole that he created with his own spell and said that when he tests the magic of the 9th and 10th, there is some delay. The incinerated space was smoking and only debris remained. The main character raised his head up and smiled, noting that this weather was just right for him, and now he would be able to secretly practice magic on his own and without sticking his head out. Eftal's thoughts were interrupted by his older brother, who ran and called out to the boy, causing the hero to shudder in surprise at the voice behind him. Fraser began to fuss in panic, and looking around said that he heard a powerful lightning strike and asked if Eftal was okay. The main character justified himself, waving his arms, that the thunder had passed, and answered that he was completely fine. The older brother sighed with relief and said that he was glad about it, to which Eftal again noted that he had scared Fraser. The brother's face changed to a more stern one, and he said that the boy should go to the military academy next year and threatened him not to hurt himself and to be more careful. The elder brother came up close to the young man, to which he received a confused but positive answer. Eftal sighed tiredly, wondering whether the entrance exam had been approved, since after the sparring it had been decided that the young man would study at the military academy. Eftal himself, and now the boy was 14 years old. Covering themselves from the rain with large leaves, the boys walked towards home. The boy thought that the military academy would not help him, and despite everything, the pursuit of magic would go slowly. Eftal understood that now he lacked compatibility with magic, and therefore, as a young man, when he turned 15, he was going to leave home. The boy decided to go to the Academy of Magic. Eftal's thoughts were interrupted again by his brother's voice, who said that he had good news for the boy. Arriving home, the boys were sitting at the dinner table. The woman, not believing Fraser's words, asked if he was telling the truth. The main character's older brother happily declared that their father wanted to meet Eftal. Eftal drank tea and listened silently. The hero's mother covered her mouth in embarrassment and rejoiced at the news. The woman burst into tears of joy and sighed as she said that it was all thanks to Fraser, who taught the boy military sciences and the art of fencing. The boy called out to his mother in confusion. The mother couldn't stand it any longer and hugged her son and said that it was amazing. Eftal didn't expect such actions and almost fell off the chair, swaying back. The hero's mother stroked her son's head, praising him for finally getting to the point where his father would recognize him. The boy became confused and called his mother again. Lost in thought, Eftal believed that the meeting with his father was pointless because the Duke had not visited the boy for 14 years. The boy stepped back and gently pushed his mother away, asking her not to cling to him, to which the woman was indignant. The elder brother Fraser wiped away tears and thought it was strange to cry at such a moment and was happy for his younger brother, asking if he was happy. The main character's mother cried even harder and agreed for her son, answering that he was with his brother every single day and saw him grow up. Eftal smiled softly and thought that it was only for the sake of his two close people that he would meet his father, because he did not want to disappoint them. The heroes arrived at the Azol mansion Alcott the estate, which was guarded by 2 guards at the very gate. The elder brother replied that they were there and said that he would offer this estate to Eftal's father. Eftal began to look at his father's estate with admiration, saying how amazing it was. The boy thought he had come there for his mother and his older brother, but now he thought it was not a bad idea to meet his descendant. The guards bowed politely to the invited guests. The boy opened his mouth joyfully and declared with happy eyes that this was what his descendant's house was like. Walking forward behind the elders along the corridors, the boy was amazed at every painting or strange sculpture. Having reached the main hall, Fraser, who was walking ahead, ordered the doors to be opened. Entering inside second, the Duke's son turned to his father, saying that he had brought Eftal as he had asked. The Duke thanked his son for his work. Eftal looked straight at his father. Duke Alcott, Eftal's father, looked at his youngest son, squinting and leaning on his elbow. Not far from his father stood the eldest son, Joachim. The bald man stood straight, looking back at his younger brother. Eftola's mother and the Duke exchanged glances and all remained silent. The woman began to bow sharply as Eftal stepped forward. The Duke and his eldest son were surprised by such an impudent act of the illegitimate boy. The boy stopped and proudly said that he was glad to meet his father and introduced himself, saying that he had wanted to meet him for a long time. The hero's mother and elder brother, who were standing behind him, shuddered at the young man's voice. The Duke and the elder son listened to the boy in silence. The head of the house looked at his son with disdain and replied, addressing him as His Excellency the Duke, Al-Kotu. The Duke continued to say something about being an illegitimate child, and therefore could not officially be called his son, and added that the boy was a disgrace to his family. The unpleasant words hit the young man mentally. Eftal looked at his father in confusion, thinking that he was his son, whom he had not seen for 14 years. The boy agreed with the Duke and called him as he asked, to which he received approval from the mustachioed man. Thinking out loud, the Duke noted that even though Eftal was born into their Thunder Emperor line, he couldn't understand how the boy had no compatibility with magic. The head of the house leaned back and declared that their founder, the Thunder Emperor, was crying because of him. Above the Duke's head, the size of a man, hung a picture of Eftal with a crown. The guy mentally roared in his soul and said that he was the Emperor of Thunder, and justified his tears by the fact that he finally had the opportunity to meet his descendant, and he turned out to be an unreliable person. The Duke asked how such a brat with no magical compatibility could enter the military academy and become a scholarship recipient. The guy agreed that such data was correct. The Duke laughed out loud, saying that this was wonderful news. The boy did not understand his father's behavior because he was happy about it despite the fact that he was an illegitimate child and thought that the Duke might not be a bad person at all. The head of the house made a serious expression and bowed his head, answering that he could now stop giving child support. This statement confused the guy and he backed away. The Duke began to explain that since they now had a scholarship, their daily needs would be covered, and added that when the boy entered the 3rd year, the military would definitely take him under their wing and provide him with a decent salary. The man clenched his fist and joyfully shouted that now he would no longer have to spend money on Eftal. Having sat down, the head of the house ordered the guy to do his best not to tarnish the honor of his family name. The main character's face turned pale, and in his thoughts he took his words back and confirmed that the man in front of him was disgusting and did not believe that they were called only for these words. The Duke called Joachim over. The eldest son of the family approached his father and asked what was wanted of him. The Duke replied, pointing his finger at the boy, that although the child was illegitimate, he was still a member of the ducal family. The head of the house said that the eldest son should confirm his expectations and check whether the youngest son would dare to disgrace the honor of their family. Joachim twisted his face and smiled maliciously, asking if he understood correctly that he should discipline the dog, meaning Eftal, and putting his hand to his chest, he replied that he would do it with pleasure. The main character looked at them angrily and understood what the problem was with the people opposite him. The heroes moved to the training hall. Eftal was asked if he understood everything correctly, to which the guy answered positively. Fraser dressed his brother and warned him that even though the fight was staged, he asked him to be careful. Looking back, Fraser nervously added that even if Joachim looked like that, they said that his older brother had achieved outstanding results in fencing back in his school days. The middle brother recalled how Iohim looked at 15 and said that the man was a master of his craft and, unlike Director Morrill, the older brother was not one of those people who would give in to someone like a minor. Eftal, recalling his last fight, said with surprise that he had been given in then. Fraser reminded the guy that he could surrender and warned that if he was not sure of victory, he should immediately surrender to the enemy, to which he received consent from Eftal. The main character thought that it was a hassle and did not understand why Joachim had so much hatred towards the guy immediately after the first meeting. Eftal was preparing for the upcoming sparring and confidently looked forward straight at his enemy. The guy began to approach his opponent closer, while he laughed, holding 2 swords in his hands, and said that Eftal could run away like a girl to her home. Eftal said that he was not going to run away. Joachim smiled evilly, narrowed his eyes, and looked at the boy. Joachim threw the sword to the boy and Eftal caught it. The boy asked, looking at the sword, what it was, saying that it was too heavy for a regular wooden sword. Joachim replied that this sword was also a training one, but it was made of a special wood that he didn't usually use, and if you hit a person with it with all your strength, you can break a bone or destroy a skull. The man asked if the boy understood what that could mean. Eftal tilted his head to the side and asked what this could mean, to which Joachim became embarrassed and began to fuss, answering that when it came to idiocy, the son was no different from his mother, insulting Eftal. The protagonist got angry at the man's words. Joachim smiled and said that the boy and his mother were the perfect duo of stupidity. and promised to personally train the boy to wean him away from stupid thinking, stating that he was Mr. Joachim and the eldest son of the head of the family. The man turned his attention to the boy's mother and said that no one had ever thought about them because they were a family without any compatibility with magic. The woman shuddered, hearing Joachim's words. The eldest son continued speaking, remembering how the main character's mother, in tears, begged the Duke to give birth to a child, and a child like Eftal appeared. The woman shrank. The man stood up in front of the young man and reminded the boy that he was a person who had no compatibility with magic. Coming up close, Joachim said that he wanted to kill Eftal's mother for bringing shame on their entire family, but he took pity and resigned himself to the existence of such a child in their family as Eftal. The guys looked at each other with looks full of anger. Joachim swung his sword near the protagonist's neck, which he dodged. The eldest son of the family said that he would allow the boy to get a head start and strike him first. Eftal was shaking with anger and did not understand how such a man dared to say such things and did not attack. Joachim, noticing the boy's delay, asked what had happened and why he did not attack, and noticed how the boy was shaking and noticed this. Joachim crossed the line by sticking out his tongue and mentioning how their father dishonored the hero's mother, saying that he would dishonor the boy too. The enemy's words made Eftal very angry, gritting his teeth. The guy did not take his eyes off Joachim. Unable to bear it, Eftal rushed with a sharp jump, smearing his sword at Joachim, thinking that such a man had become his descendant. The man shuddered. Joachim backed away, his face twisted. Eftal missed, and the eldest son jumped back, dodging the young man's attack. Eftal rushed to attack again, and thought that even though he did not use physical enhancement, and the other could barely dodge, the guy began to perform a series of attacks, forcing the enemy to retreat back, and realized that the whole story about Joachim being a master of the sword was a complete lie. Joachim held out his sword, forcing the weapons to cross, and tried to hold back the guy's attack. The man proudly declared that he was able to stop Eftal. The guy used physical enhancement, causing the opponent to be scared. With renewed strength, the young man pressed the enemy, while he held the swords in the air and sweated. Joachim didn't understand how the guy could get so strong. The sword was getting closer and closer to his face until it completely squeezed his nose and eyes. Eftal was able to break the opponent's jaw, and Joachim's bones trembled. The attack hit the man so hard that he flew into the air and fell, already losing consciousness. The Duke, the hero's mother, and Fraser watched the scene in horror and surprise. The man flew away from Eftal a few meters, and the guy, without turning around, said that he would not repeat it again, but ordered him never to insult his mother again. Joachim jumped up with a broken jaw and called out to the boy, saying that he couldn't just leave after doing that to him. Eftal began to speak. The protagonist turned around and responded with all his fury that if the fight continued, Joachim would die at the hands of the young man. The cold look and words of the guy penetrated the soul of the man, and he fell to the ground in fear, backing away from Eftal. The guy threw the sword back, returning it to its owner. The man trembled in fear, not understanding what was wrong with the guy because he should not have known what a fight to the death was, but at the same time he had such a murderous aura. The young man took off all his equipment. Eftal went to his mother saying that now everything was over and suggested to go home. The mother looked at her son with concern and asked in confusion whether in front of her was the usual Eftal that she was used to seeing. The young man extended his hand to his mother and smiled, agreeing with her, explaining that now before him was the normal Eftal. The mother took her son by the hand and happily agreed to go back home. The boy pulled the woman along with him until Fraser interrupted them. Eftal jumped up and took the stance of a soldier taking an oath and called out to his father. The Duke backed away from the boy on his couch in fear. Eftal bowed to the Duke and said that he was sincerely grateful for the invitation and that they would now kindly leave the man. The head of the house, sweating and stammering, replied that he should try to enter the military academy next year. The mother and the young man bowed to the Duke and agreed. Eftal and his mother were walking along the street and alley, and the boy decided to apologize to his mother, to which a question came in response. The boy was silent and thought that although 400 years had passed, he was sorry that his descendants turned out to be such people, which is why the boy simply could not find the words to express his indignation. The mother leaned over to her son and asked in confusion why her son was apologizing like an adult, adding that Eftal was a strange child. The boy, scratching the back of his head, laughed and agreed with the woman, thinking that he too was in some way a parent, even though he was now in such a body. Eftal could not expect that the first goal in his life would be to fully manifest magic in this life, and also there were these two who led a huge army. The boy, running ahead, waved his hand to his mother and suggested that they speed up because he wanted to get home sooner. The mother responded with concern, warning the boy that he could fall if he hurried. A few days later, a new event occurred in the kingdom of Azul. People cried out and asked for the gates to the kingdom to be opened. An army of soldiers could be seen through the open gates. The knight blew his horn, saying that the Azul Order kingdom that leads the magic front is going forward. The army of knights agreed and knocked their axe-tipped spears. The knights walked forward, and when they entered the city, people crowded, and the chief shouted to give the knights of the Order of Azul a campaign, shouting that they should be careful and wishing victory over Gris. 3 spies watched the knights from afar and then silently moved back along the fence down the street. One of the caped Jeepions knocked on the door of the Alcott residence and asked for forgiveness from Duke Alcott for visiting so late at night. The man said that the neighboring state of Gris was expanding and heading towards the Cristo Mountains, adding that the Holy Knights Order of Azula and the Azula Kingdom Army had set out on a campaign. A small window opened and the Duke's face was visible. The man was hurrying to the night guests. Was it true, and how the savages acted? The spy agreed and replied that their vanguard had already taken up position. The man added that they were waiting approximately 20 kilometers southwest of the Azul Kingdom. The warriors were rejoicing in the war, talking about how they would kill everyone. The Duke thought about it and noted, putting his hand to his chin, that a coup d'etat was finally beginning. 2 weeks have passed since then. The mother loudly called her son to eat. Eftal firmly believed that those guys were real fools, completely incapable of appreciating his kindness and willingness to meet them halfway. But despite all his confidence, inside he felt a vague anxiety that sooner or later they would certainly want to take revenge on him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Mom was surprised and wondered who could have come. She asked her son to check who came. The door opened. Moriarty walked confidently into the house. Their appearance immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. The man politely apologized to both of them, as he understood perfectly well that they had no intention of disturbing anyone with their arrival. Eftal stopped suddenly when he saw the baby in his older brother's arms. The baby was sleeping peacefully, his head buried in the adult's shoulder. Meanwhile, 12 hours ago, in the Kingdom of Azul, in the palace of the Kingdom of Azul, the Duke's second son announced that the Sacred Knights Order and army were leaving to fight a neighboring country to protect the country's territory. During their absence, the royal guard would be in charge of protecting the capital. Moriarty wondered if they really had to be so determined to protect the royal court and the capital that they even had to bring these little chickens from the military academy here. Fraser added that the truth was that they had received word that the ministers were going to kill His Highness, the Crown Prince, at this very moment of great importance. In the Kingdom of Azul, since the second son is considered better than the first son of the previous king, the second son serves the current king while the first son serves the ministers. But the second son was not blessed in childhood, so it was written in stone that the first son would become the next king. However, fate decreed otherwise. The current king eventually had his own heir, a long-awaited son, who became the official crown prince. The faction of the first son, who was supposed to take the throne of the next king, suddenly broke out with the intention of killing him. There are rumors of an assassination attempt on the crown prince, and the rumor is spreading fast. Fraser explained that this is the situation. Moriarty suddenly realized the true picture of what was happening. The cabinet of ministers was headed by the leader of the first son faction, who was also the father of the Duke's eldest son. The soldiers sighed heavily and reported bad news. Savages from the southern lands had penetrated right into the royal capital. The boys were puzzled, trying to understand what kind of savages they were talking about. The question hung in the air, causing concern and curiosity at the same time. Suddenly, the silence was cut by a sharp explosion that came from somewhere outside the window. The roar echoed through the streets, causing everyone to instantly jump up and run closer to the window, peering tensely into the clouds of smoke rising nearby. Fraser shouted that this was not a good sign and immediately ordered that His Highness, the Crown Prince, be taken to a safe place. Moriarty reacted instantly, launching a swift attack on the suddenly appearing savages. Fraser began to rescue the Crown Prince from the room. The warrior continued to bravely fight off the attacking enemies, protecting the escape route with his own body. The young man, having gathered his strength, quickly carried the little heir away from danger, trying to protect him from the mortal threat. The brother began to explain that since they were in a hurry, this was the only place they could think of to ensure safety. He added that they miraculously survived, having overcome numerous difficulties and dangers on the way here. While Eftal was enthusiastically playing with a small child, his thoughts wandered far from childish games. He tried to imagine possible courses of action in the difficult situation that had arisen. He thought about how to act correctly and effectively, taking into account the circumstances and consequences of each decision. The young man was sincerely perplexed as to how it was possible to be cruel to a child. The young man painfully wondered why, despite the increased defensive measures, the savages were able to penetrate the capital. Fraser said it was likely that their father, the head of the cabinet faction, was behind this, making him the person who would see a significant increase in his position or power as a result of a change in monarch. Eftal was truly shocked to realize that the conspiracy against the young heir was led by his father himself. Moriarty wondered what they would do next. Fraser began to think that they would not be able to return to the royal capital. The safest place was abroad. They will deliver His Highness, the Crown Prince, to the main army of their kingdom. The man added that it was night and already cold. It would be hard on the prince's health. The partner replied that he was right, and they would leave tomorrow morning. The next morning, Moriarty asked to be careful, and Fraser thanked Ilea-san. Eftal asked the soldiers to wait. The boy timidly turned to his elders, humbly asking for permission to accompany them on their journey. After all, he clearly remembered that memorable moment when His Majesty, the King, personally presented him with the honorary title of 4 emperors. Therefore, the young man sincerely believed that he bore personal responsibility for the protection of his native country. Moriarty thought that having an extra assistant would be a good support. Even one ally could make a significant contribution to the common cause. Eftal firmly believed in his own strengths and capabilities. The young man intended to overcome all difficulties, using all the strength of his spirit and magical abilities. The young man asked his mother to forgive him, but admitted to himself that he could not forgive his father and his supporters. Fraser began to explain that after descending from the mountains, they would leave the Nile forest, then cross the plains of Moralis, and finally reach the border of the neighboring country. Junior understood him. Suddenly, Moriarty noticed something. The sounds came from the bushes. And then, from behind the bushes, savages appeared. The warriors shouted that they were waiting for them ahead. One of the savages clearly uttered the demand that if the travelers wanted to stay alive, they should voluntarily give them the crown prince. The man wondered what would happen if one of them took on the role of His Highness' protector. He came to the conclusion that, in this case, only 2 fighters would remain who were capable of entering the battle. Then it would be 2 against 5. While he was wondering if the enemy was listening to his words, Eftal boldly entered into battle with the rest of the enemies. Agility and speed allowed him to easily dodge blows, and accurate reactions helped him deliver precise blows. Most of the enemies immediately received serious damage. The attack was so sudden and precise that most of the opponents did not even have time to defend themselves. The guy acted quickly and decisively, neutralizing the threat one after another. The warriors, taken by surprise, looked around in confusion, trying in vain to understand what had happened. All the enemies fell to the ground almost instantly, causing confusion among the surviving soldiers. Suddenly, Eftal realized that there was still one enemy left. He asked the enemy to stop. The elder brother looked at the younger one with concern and insistently asked him not to go too far away. Fraser explained that they could find peace of mind by defeating all enemies. But the best plan now was to take His Highness the Prince to safety. He asked Eftal if he agreed, and he agreed. However, the older brother called him incredible, causing surprise in the younger one. He explained that he was in no way inferior in the art of fencing even to Director Moriarty. The young man modestly objected that this was not at all the case. The director thought that, frankly speaking, Eftal was most likely faster than him, and he reflected that he was no longer at the age to be his equal. But suddenly, the man screamed indignantly and became furious, believing that he was the one who was faster. Rage boiled inside, making him forget about everything else. His face turned red with indignation, his breathing quickened, his eyes sparkled with anger. The partner asked if something had happened to him. He replied that it was nothing. In that case, Fraser told them to hurry up, and they agreed. The boys walked slowly along a narrow forest path, surrounded by a thick green canopy of trees. Suddenly, Eftal became alert, noticing something unusual. The partner, agreeing, replied that indeed there was an ominous silence in the forest. Even the smallest animals had disappeared, hiding in shelters. Not a rustle of leaves, not a twitter of birds, absolute stillness reigned everywhere. Such calm seemed unreal, threatening. The young man realized that his older brother had also noticed this unpleasant atmosphere. He confirmed the boy's statement. Suddenly, Moriarty became alert and alarmed, catching a barely audible sound. The team turned sharply to face the forest, ready to meet any threat. Eftal suddenly felt a familiar tingling in the air, the clear and powerful essence of lightning. Fraser said seriously that he had no idea what was going on, but that it was clearly unwise to remain where he was. He suggested that the others leave the forest as soon as possible. The rest of the group realized the seriousness of the situation and immediately supported the proposal. Without further ado or discussion, they moved forward, trying to stay together and remain alert. Suddenly, he abruptly ordered the group to stop, seeing something amazing in the distance. Stopping, he froze in amazement, his eyes wide open. What appeared before them caused shock and confusion at the same time. An army of soldiers stood before them. Fraser couldn't believe his eyes, suspecting a trap, but the scale was shocking. The director assumed that it was someone's cruel joke. It turned out that the army was the Order of Magicians who followed the Duke. Moriarty made the terrifying assumption that the enemy was planning to turn the entire forest into a fiery wasteland with one powerful explosion. This thought caused panic among his comrades. Eftal suddenly stopped and looked intently somewhere into the depths of the forest. His face became focused and surprised. The young man pointed sharply in that direction and said that the path they had come from was engulfed in flames. Fraser said he saw fire, those flashes that had just been going off in the woods, and explained that the woods behind them had been set on fire. Looking at the baby standing in the middle of the clearing, the director realized that the Duke was deliberately making them a target, trying to lure them out. The man turned to his partner and asked if there was even the slightest hope of saving the life of His Highness the Crown Prince. Fraser had come to the conclusion that if the three of them ran out into an open field with good visibility, the enemy would unleash a concentrated stream of magic on them before they could reach their target. In other words, they were in a very difficult situation. Moriarty was acutely aware of the complexity of the situation, with the inexorable flames raging behind him, devouring the remains of the shelter, and the powerful Order of Magi standing menacingly ahead, blocking the way. The paths to salvation were completely blocked, creating a critically dangerous situation. The director sighed heavily and added gloomily that the group was effectively squeezed from all sides. The man looked cautiously at his young companion and asked Eftal to keep a close eye on His Highness the Crown Prince. The young man answered affirmatively, understanding the enormous responsibility placed upon him. Moriarty said that most things in the world are governed by the true spirit. He will not give up until the very end, that is, his credo. Fraser shouted what he was going to do. The man excitedly asked his partners to run away quickly while he distracted the opponents. His voice sounded desperate, his eyes were burning with determination to sacrifice himself for the common cause. However, his comrades sternly objected, categorically stating that such a decision was completely unacceptable. Fraser said irritably that this was why he didn't like stubborn people. He added that this was perhaps the only thing he didn't like about Director Moriarty's personality. In such a situation, he had to think rationally. Whatever happened, he had to go and convince his father to reconsider his views. The friend shouted that, in that case, he could die. Fraser replied that his father was not at all so terrible. Yes, of course, he was difficult, but he could not be called a bad person. The young man was unarmed and asked his father to listen to him carefully because he wanted to tell him something important. Joachim laughed. The Duke noted that he had once kicked out his son. Fraser, standing with his hands outstretched, imploringly asked him to immediately stop such actions and expressed a desire to talk calmly about everything. He added that there was still a chance to fix the situation, suggesting that they pretend nothing had happened and head back to the royal capital together. The Duke turned to his son and stated that he was constantly getting in his way. The guy was completely shocked by such an unexpected statement. The Duke commanded that the young man's life be taken immediately. The man also ordered the entire forest to be burned to the ground. Moriarty said that this was a ritual to build a pharmacy. This spell bears the name of one of the 4 legendary emperors. The man realized in horror that this was a 6th-level spell, the Thunder Emperor Eftal. It was a priceless treasure under the control of the Duke's family. Eftal noted the word priceless. Fraser said that it was useless and that the boys should run. Behind him, a gigantic stream of magical energy raged. The boy desperately and anxiously shouted out his older brother's name. Moriarty persistently urged him to flee as quickly as possible. Fraser, full of tears, looked sadly at his partners. Then he was suddenly swallowed up by a powerful wave of mighty magic. Eftal desperately shouted his older brother's name. The director, pulling him back, indignantly asked if he wanted to be in the area of effect of the attack spell. The young man was deeply depressed as he looked at the huge pillar of fire that had engulfed his older brother. Fraser's motionless, lifeless body lay before him. Vivid pictures of their shared past life flashed before the guy's eyes. Eftal cried out loudly that such a thing was absolutely unforgivable. Moriarty stood frozen in complete amazement at such an emotional reaction. The young man was seething with righteous anger and indignation. The director was perplexed, observing the abrupt change in his friend's aura, as if it had instantly been transformed, becoming completely different. Eftal realized why his aura had changed, because in his previous life, as a Merlin, he had invariably transformed every time he felt anger. The boy decided to go and teach his enemies how to use magic powers correctly. The man screamed shrilly, calling him a madman and warning him of the danger of such an act. The guy cast an ancient 9th-level spell, the Absolute Freeze, Cositus. The spell burst out, shaking the space around with a powerful wave of cold. Moriarty looked around in confusion, amazed by the sight. The entire forest had frozen, turning into an icy landscape. The Duke stood in complete confusion, completely unable to understand how such an incredible metamorphosis had occurred. Joachim realized that his opponent had used magic of unprecedented power, but he too was completely confused about what was happening. Eftal said slowly that the remarkable thing was that the use of magic of such a high level by a single being in this world should have been an almost unheard of event. He continued his thought, adding that he himself was not very knowledgeable in water magic, but he assumed that even the Duke would be powerless to resist such power. The young man believed that he had correctly taught his sons the art of using magic in battle. However, the Duke considered it completely impossible that a child would ever be able to create something like that. The man excitedly exclaimed that they were facing an enemy, and they must certainly demonstrate the full power and terror of the Order of Sorcerers by crushing the enemy. The Magus began casting a 5th-level spell, Magic Arrows, Storm Stream Explosive Arrows. The Duke decisively gave the order to begin the shelling. A huge avalanche of magical arrows rushed straight at the young man. Eftal wondered why these mages were unable to cast 5th-level spells themselves. His thoughts were interrupted when a powerful stream of magical energy suddenly enveloped him entirely. The Duke cried out in delight, proclaiming in a jubilant voice how magnificent the event was. However, to the Duke's great amazement, his illegitimate son appeared safe and sound, noting that shooting such arrows only irritated him. All the magicians present were in a state of utter amazement, as the young man remained alive after being directly hit by 2 powerful spells of the 2nd level, Magic Arrows, and the 5th level, Explosive Arrows. Eftal asked if they knew about the existence of passive magic of protective circles, assuming that they most likely did not, and expressed regret at the lack of preparation of the students. The Duke indignantly roared that if it had come to an extreme measure, let them use the last hope of the Order of Witchcraft, shoot at the enemy with a powerful spell of the 6th level, known as the Thunder Emperor, Eftal. The young man came to the conclusion that the enemy had no other options but to attack, and internally reconciled himself to the inevitability of the attack. The Duke immediately gave a strict order to open fire. A formidable 6th-level spell, the Thunder Emperor's critical lightning blast, Eftal, fell upon him. The young man thought bitterly that attributing such a spell to his name had become a shameful and disgraceful fact for him. He instantly activated the 7th-tier defensive spell, the Four Spirits Supreme Defense Circle, Extreme Magic Defense. The entire mass of arrows fell on the strongest protective barrier formed by the magic shield. The magicians, seized with panic, screamed that their famous combat technique had been easily blocked by the enemy, considering what had happened, a real miracle and a manifestation of inhuman power. Eftal laughed contemptuously, openly declaring those gathered to be insignificant and pathetic creatures. The young man rushed towards the army, genuinely interested in whether he would be able to demonstrate his perfect swordsmanship in a real battle. With one sharp movement, he defeated the closest enemy with one blow of his sword. The enemy cried out pitifully in excruciating pain, and the guy grinned with satisfaction, glad that one was already defeated. Joachim loudly gave the order to attack, claiming that the enemy intended to strike directly at the forward positions of their defensive lines. Eftal chuckled cheerfully, jokingly suggesting that he could destroy 100 soldiers, or even 200, finding such a prospect quite amusing. He defeated the second one first, then the third one. The guy realized that he was waving his sword and the man was screaming. He was waving his sword again and the man was bleeding. Then he realized that the sword was doing its job just fine. The young man thought that perhaps he should learn to infuse his sword with magic, and immediately activated the second-level spell, Lightning Blast. The young man managed to charge his weapon with magic, when suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement nearby, that some magician was energetically starting to weave a spell in his direction. Eftal mockingly asked if he really intended to use his insignificant magic arrow against him again, insistently asking him to shut up and stop bothering him. The young man instantly destroyed the enemy, easily cutting off his head. The remaining magicians hastily retreated, sincerely believing that they had encountered a bloodthirsty monster. He sarcastically asked one of the runners if his mother hadn't taught him as a child that one shouldn't run away from a battlefield. The boy dealt with the enemies instantly, making sure that it was enough to swing the sword, and people die, falling to the ground. But the young man considered it a wonderful experience in any case. He also realized that in this rabbit hunt, simply chopping these cowards from behind would not be a good way to practice with a sword, and he decided that he had no other choice. Eftal decided to give them an unforgettable show so that they could enjoy their final journey to hell, and began casting a spell. The magicians stood in bewilderment, not understanding what was happening, while heavy, dark clouds quickly gathered over the battlefield. They realized that the enemy was controlling the weather itself, using a lost art, God's providence. The enemy arrogantly clarified that they were partly right about weather control, but wrong about the origin of the clouds that appeared. Eftal proudly announced that he controlled the power of lightning, emphasizing that this was not some childish game that they were used to playing. He activated the strongest spell of the 10th level, the Thunder Emperor Eftal, deciding to clearly demonstrate the true power of the natural element of lightning. The opponents felt an all-consuming fear seeing the magic of the 10th level. All the magicians were struck and scattered in all directions by the unbridled energy of the blow. A colossal, sparkling column of deadly lightning towered over the battlefield. The blow was so powerful that it created lightning in the shape of a skull. The enemy was seriously wounded, and the powerful blow caused a deafening explosion, raising a thick column of smoke, inside which the bodies of the stricken fighters swirled chaotically. The Duke and Joachim were caught in a crushing shockwave that knocked them off their feet, throwing them away with great force, leaving a feeling of tightness in their chests and a ringing in their ears. But suddenly a protective dome appeared around them, like a spherical wall, instantly absorbing the destructive energy of the explosion and protecting them from the deadly effects of the elements. The Duke did not understand what had happened and had no idea how they had managed to escape. Joachim told his father that they had survived. Suddenly, the protective spheres shuddered, crackled, showered with sparks, and, unable to withstand the pressure, burst loudly, scattering into myriads of sparkling fragments. Eftal was slowly but surely heading towards them, his figure standing out among the debris and clouds of dust hanging over the battlefield. His gaze was cold and determined, every detail of his figure exuded menace. His relatives looked at him with undisguised amazement and confusion, completely unable to imagine by what miracle he had managed to survive this deadly battle, remaining unharmed in the midst of general destruction and chaos. The Duke turned to him imploringly, begging him to leave them alone and disappear forever, contemptuously calling his own illegitimate son a monster. Joachim grabbed his brother by the collar and angrily asked if he expected them to let him go quietly after he had openly spoken out against the order of Magi in this duchy. The guy quickly threw his hand forward, with a sharp blow, his palm crashing straight into the opponent's cheek. From the powerful push, the enemy's body was torn from its place and quickly flew head down, deeply imprinted into the rocky ground. Eftal, looking at him with an icy gaze, said indignantly that his father had tried to destroy His Highness, the Crown Prince. It would have been the greatest shame if the mastermind himself had died earlier, escaping punishment. Do they not agree with this? He ended with a rhetorical question. The Duke's voice shook as he protested, wondering how his enemy could even dare to behave in such a way, claiming that resisting him was tantamount to treason. The son swung and brought down a crushing kick straight into his father's face, putting all his pent-up rage and strength into one swift lunge. The Duke fell face down, hitting the hard surface of the ground painfully, feeling a sharp pain spreading throughout his body. Eftal firmly declared that heretics like the Duke, who were capable of raising their hand even against their own children, deserved the highest measure of punishment and would certainly be executed. The remaining enemies on the battlefield were defeated and finally routed, and so the coup d'etat ended in just an attempt. After that, the instigators, Olcott and Joachim, were arrested and sometime later publicly executed. In addition, their duchy lost all respect and authority in the eyes of the people, to the point that there was talk of completely eliminating the title itself and even demolishing the ancestral home of the Eftal family. The younger brother was genuinely happy that his older brother was alive. Fraser greeted him warmly and added that, apparently, he had made him quite worried. Eftal carefully asked if everything was okay and if his older brother would be able to move around on his own again. The older brother smiled and reassured him, assuring him that he had almost recovered and was feeling much better. He never imagined that this necklace would save his life. Eftal guessed that this thing was created many centuries ago. It is an ancient magical artifact, Oberon's guardian, also known as the protective stone of the Fairy King, which he used in critical situations. This amulet protected his older brother at the very moment when he was under the most powerful attack of the members of the Order of Mages. To think that it was his older brother Fraser who was destined to own this item in the current generation. The young man was sincerely happy with this turn of fate. Fraser is firmly convinced that salvation came solely thanks to the heavenly patronage of the Thunder Emperor, whose sacred power protected him in his hour of need and gave him new hope for the future. The younger brother hugged his older brother tightly around the shoulders, pressing himself against him, and with sincere emotion expressed deep gratitude for the fact that fate allowed him to survive such a dangerous test. The boy understood that after this incident, serious discussions arose regarding the possible deprivation of the Duke's titles, but thanks to the outstanding merits of his elder brother, who risked his life to protect His Highness the Crown Prince, the title of Duke was retained. After the fall of the previous head of the family, who lost the trust of the court and lost power, the leadership of the duchy passed to the eldest son, Fraser, the second scion of the noble family. Finally, the young man and his mother were given a separate, cozy room in a luxurious mansion belonging to a powerful duke. Somewhere high in the mountains, Fraser looked seriously at his younger brother and asked for permission to carry out his plan. He nodded thoughtfully, giving his consent. He decided to set up a protective barrier, but still advised to move away. Eftal replied that he was starting the ritual, and immediately began to prepare the spell. The boy activated the 7th level spell of the demonic tribe of the underworld, Devil's Spark. The comrades literally froze in place, caught in complete shock and bewilderment, not knowing how to react to what had happened. They were struck by the incredible intensity of the heat emanating from the spell, felt on their skin even at a considerable distance, as if the flames of hell itself had burst forth, scorching the air and creating an unbearable atmosphere. Eftal, noticeably perked up, announced to his friends that he was ready to demonstrate another unique ability. The boys could hardly believe their eyes and ears when they heard that the young man was going to present another, no less fantastic skill, and were in a state of complete stupor and delighted anticipation. He concentrated and activated the formidable 7th level spell of the Blade of the Supreme God of Winds, Chaos Storm. A colossal storm instantly swept through the dense forests, generating powerful gusts of wind that shook the centuries-old trees, swayed their crowns, and swept away all obstacles in their path. Moriarty cried out excitedly that he had thought what he had seen earlier was a figment of his imagination or an illusion in his fever, but now he clearly realized that what was happening was not a dream at all, but the most real reality. The director was surprised to see 2 7th level spells in a row. Fraser could not even imagine that the younger one was capable of controlling such powerful magic, and called it amazing. Eftal explained that controlling the wind did not cause any particular difficulties, but he was really bad at fire. Now the elder brother looked at the younger one with completely different eyes, seeing in him a true successor to the glorious name of Eftal, worthy of respect and pride of the family, possessing unique talents. The guy admitted that he was very sorry that he had hidden it from both brothers for so long. Fraser supported him with words, noting that he apparently had good reasons for such a decision. The young man stood there lost, not having the slightest idea how to explain the secret, hidden for years, which was gradually being revealed to them, causing a mixture of emotions and misunderstanding. Moriarty patted him gently on the head, calming him with a gentle gesture, and quietly noted that if the guy did not want to share his secrets yet, then no one would insist and demand revelations. The principal pointed out that such power was indeed great, and that there was obviously a reason why the student was forced to remain silent. Fraser agreed with these arguments. Eftal agreed internally, since he really had no intention of telling others that he had experienced the process of reincarnation, preferring to keep this secret to himself. Moriarty added that the three friends would be able to keep the secret between themselves, as his brother would probably also not want to talk about what happened. Fraser responded that he personally had no objection to maintaining the secret, considering such a decision reasonable and expedient. However, he believed that such power should be used extremely rarely, and that one should try to avoid demonstrating it in front of strangers, since such power inevitably attracts excessive attention and can bring about unwanted consequences. Moriarty nodded affirmatively, adding that a demonstration of such magic would lead to panic and unrest, plunging society into a state of chaos and fear of an unknown threat. The elder suddenly called out to the young man sharply, causing him to flinch and become wary, feeling a wave of anxiety and worry. He asked the young man sternly and seriously what his future plans were, warning him that if he intended to apply to the prestigious military academy, he would have to undergo thorough preparation in advance and meet strict selection requirements. Eftal confidently answered that he planned to enroll in the Academy of Magic, striving to study the art of sorcery in depth and improve his skills. Both interlocutors stared at the young man in shock, trying to comprehend the unexpected statement that had completely turned their ideas about the young magician's future upside down. Moriarty frowned in confusion, wondering out loud why the boy would want to study at the Academy of Magic if he already had a unique power that surpassed many students. Fraser intervened with interest, expressing doubt and asking how sure he was of the correctness of his decision. Eftal explained in a firm and decisive voice that he was striving to improve his magical abilities, to master new knowledge and techniques in the conditions of a specialized academy equipped with all the necessary resources for the development of talent. Eftal noted that although the academy is unlikely to discover anything radically new, it is important for him to familiarize himself with modern materials on the compatibility of magic that have appeared over the past 400 years. The young man resolutely concluded that the choice had been made irrevocably. He would continue to study the art of magic in depth, improving his skills and knowledge. The other friends sighed heavily, resigned to their comrade's decision, realizing that once it had been made, nothing could be changed. All that remained was to accept their friend's will and support his endeavors. The guy was well aware that if he stayed here longer than usual, he would be useless, since his efforts alone would be insufficient to achieve his goal. Moriarty chuckled knowingly, clapping the young man on the shoulder in a firm, friendly gesture of approval, showing his complete acceptance of the student's choice and his willingness to support his decision. The man continued, explaining that until he turned 15 and successfully passed the entrance exams to the Academy of Magic, he and Fraser would take on the responsibility of continuing the teenager's training in the art of swordsmanship and the basics of combat strategy. The director proudly declared that he would not allow his pupil to surpass him in the art of fencing, promising regular training and persistent practice. However, Eftal timidly asked the mentor to show a little more leniency and caution, and so the years passed unnoticed, as if the fleeting flow of time was inexorably rushing forward, leaving behind vivid memories of childhood and youth, bringing a new stage of life closer. The young man carefully wrote a warm letter to his mother, informing her of his intention to attend the entrance exams at the Academy of Magic, and thanking her for the endless love, support, and care she had shown him over the past years, raising a strong and purposeful person. Eftal realized that perhaps it was time to say goodbye to his home and fatherland. Only after casting a last glance at his familiar surroundings did he feel his heart fill with the warmth of memories, and he began to feel the quiet sadness of parting with his past life. The young man barely had time to think when a voice called out to him from somewhere behind him. The faces he saw before him were familiar and beloved, his mother's gentle smile, Moritarty-san, and the confident gaze of his older brother Fraser. The boy thought, lost in conjecture, how they had managed to find out about his actions. The woman looked warmly at the young man and with slight reproach noted that he was, after all, her own child. And is there even a single mother who would not feel the thoughts and desires of her beloved son, be it joy or anxiety? Looking at his mother's beloved face, Eftal realized that if he allowed his emotions to take control, tears would inevitably flow of their own accord, revealing the depth of affection and warmth of feeling hidden behind the outer severity. The mother rushed to hug her son. The young man admitted that he was very sorry that he wanted to leave without telling her anything. The woman admitted that it was very typical of him to leave without even saying goodbye to his mother. Ilya-san said that he is already an adult, so he can do whatever he wants, and if he wants to come back, he can always do it at any time. Eftal looked at his mother seriously, deeply understanding her words. Slowly reaching out, he carefully wiped away the tear that had rolled down, barely holding back his emotions. Quietly exhaling, he admitted that his mother was absolutely right. Now he understood how wrong he had been before. He hugged her again and thanked her for raising him for 15 years. Mom agreed. Moriarty, feigning indifference, quietly wiped away the tears that had appeared and explained that he had allegedly gotten sand in his eyes due to the strong wind. The boy was glad that the great day of his 15th birthday had finally arrived, marking the beginning of the path of a real wizard. His main goal is to reach the pinnacle of mastery, surpassing all competitors. This time, he intends to prove to himself and others that he is capable of overcoming the legendary wall of real talent that separates talented newcomers from true masters of their craft. The young man believed that the previous doubts and disturbing thoughts had left his consciousness forever. The tormenting thoughts that had tormented him before would no longer arise. He felt inner confidence and calm, convinced that from now on his mind was free from the doubts and worries of the past. The guy suddenly stopped abruptly, instantly tensing up his whole body. With a sharp movement, he turned his head back, peering intently into the distance. He bowed sharply and loudly declared that he thanked them for everything. There was an unyielding determination in his gaze. Eftal thought that he would continue on his way without stopping, strictly heading towards the meeting place of the wizards. He walked slowly along the busy bridge, listening to the hum of voices, the rustle of footsteps, and the sound of passing carts. There were many people around. Some were hurrying past, some were admiring the views, others were chatting, sitting on the parapets. The young man was delighted to see a busy road with travelers and caravans, voices and laughter. He felt relief and hope, finding himself among many people. The guy slowed down, feeling tired after a long journey, and decided to take a little rest. Suddenly, the young man noticed a nice, secluded place nearby, a small tea house. Now, walking away from his native walls, the young man clearly understood returning home was no longer possible. Home was left behind, becoming part of the memories stored deep in his soul. Here he thought about how to formulate his thought more precisely. His goal was to effectively use all the abilities and skills he had acquired from the Magic Academy, so it would be bad to stand out and attract unnecessary attention now. It would also be completely undesirable if his skills became known to people and began to be actively parodied. Then he would definitely be awarded loud titles like hero or something similar. After all, he just wants to develop calmly and reach the heights of art as an ordinary person. Suddenly, the young man noticed someone say that they expected nothing less from Edward Sama. The man also said that such a famous wizard had appeared in this rural area. He had come a long and difficult way to get here, and asked to accept his sincere gratitude. Anyway, the man asked him to give a lecture to the kids in his magic class about true magic. Edward turned to him and added why he decided that he could talk to him without his permission. Edward belonged to the Adventurers Guild and was an A-rank adventurer. He asked the man to be quiet because he was busy reading. The interlocutor was frightened and hastened to add that he had not wanted to disturb Edward at all and asked him to forgive him generously. He expressed regret for having shown such impudence and suggested that what had happened be considered an unfortunate misunderstanding. The adventurer also added that he should thoroughly understand that he values every second of his life highly and is not going to waste it on any random trifles. The man humbly agreed with his interlocutor and asked him to accept his sincere apology, hoping that he would forget the unpleasant episode and forgive his inappropriate intervention. Eftal, watching what was happening, thought that this arrogant magician was a real terrible narcissist. Edward reasoned that it was only natural, since he was a member of the A-rank Adventurers Guild, even though he was only 20 years old. The youth paid special attention to the rank, confirming the high status of the man. The magician noted that it was pointless to compare him with his interlocutor, since he was only a 50-year-old old man of low rank C who was still far from the level of skill and fame of the magician himself. The humiliated man clutched his head with both hands, desperately trying to preserve the remnants of his dignity. His face turned red from indignation and pain caused by Edward's caustic words. The unpleasant aftertaste in his soul was intensified by a feeling of his own impotence and worthlessness. That adventurer declared that this elderly teacher, who was teaching magic in some backwater and had also retired, was only a pitiful semblance of a magician and could cause nothing but disappointment. Edward hoped and believed that his interlocutor would soon realize that he was wrong. The man, his head bowed in humiliation and his shoulders shaking nervously, quietly agreed in a subdued voice. He suddenly remembered that they were going to have a festive banquet with exquisite drinks, and immediately invited the adventurer to join and enjoy the celebration. Edward found the proposal ridiculous. He suddenly tugged the girl's metal chain, pulling her harshly towards him. The girl screamed in sharp pain, her eyes widened in fear and despair. The traveler added that today has a special meaning for him and his demoness. He asked the man to pay attention to what was happening around him, claiming that an extraordinary event was unfolding here that could not be missed. In addition, Edward specified that the period of adaptation of the slave sign to the body is almost complete. Today, the symbol has acquired the necessary clarity and stability of form. The old man realized that if a foreign liquid gets into the girl before the adaptation process is complete, it will violate the integrity of the slave sign. The magician agreed and confirmed the correctness of the conclusion. Eftal believed that this was indeed the case, that a purchased slave must first be brought into proper physical condition before being used for entertainment. He stressed that, frankly speaking, the sight of such a person makes him feel very disgusted. However, if the young man had not accepted the demoness Merlin as his student, she could have ended up like this unfortunate girl. Suddenly, a man ran in. The waitress greeted him with a friendly smile. The man shouted that there was a giant orc roaming the streets, a real monster. Eftal froze as he heard the warning of the giant orc. His thoughts began to spin, creating disturbing images of destruction and death. He could clearly imagine the scale of the disaster if the rumors were true. The monster lazily ate the remains of the destroyed cart. Destruction gave him pleasure, allowed him to throw out accumulated energy and show his strength. The cart turned into a pile of useless chips lying under the feet of the giant creature. Suddenly, the orc looked back sharply at the young mage, catching him off guard. The young man was confused, not knowing what to do in a dangerous situation. Some of the locals insistently asked to send a messenger to the Cavalier Order or to involve specialists from the guild so that they could deal with the dangerous monster. The teacher urged the surrounding people to remain calm and avoid panic. He announced that the nearby Edward Wildfire was a high-class adventurer with the status of a guild member and an A rank. The people began to shout excitedly that they were now saved. But this adventurer said that the orc was only a B+ difficulty level, meaning the threat was significantly lower than expected. Edward asked to leave the monster to him, stating that such a lowly creature had no business here any longer. The girls confirmed that they should not expect less from an A-rank adventurer. Eftal was pleased that, after 400 years, it seemed that rank A remained just as incredibly high and prestigious. Edward decided to go to where the terrible monster lived. He firmly stated that he would become his worthy opponent. And then Edward decided to show true magic to everyone. After all, this is not something he thinks a small village can see every day. The villagers rejoiced, knowing that they would now be saved from disaster. Smiles shone on their faces, and hope returned to the hearts of every villager. The adventurer boldly summoned a powerful spirit of the atmosphere, and the orc visibly stirred, feeling the power of the ancient force filling the air around him. He asked the spirit to answer the call of his spell and show him the higher flame that had been promised to him. The magician confidently activated the 4th-level spell of higher fire magic, Holy Flash, filling the surrounding area with a blinding flame of incredible purity and power. The attack hit the giant orc with devastating force, shaking the ground and causing a deafening roar. People were happy. and Edward was proud that he was able to control the highest magic of the 4th level, such power he usually did not demonstrate for no reason. Eftal sneered, noticing that the man's highest magic had only reached the 4th level. The magician solemnly announced that the show was over, but the villagers looked at each other with obvious fear, realizing how great the power of magic was. Suddenly, something strange happened, and the adventurer thoughtfully wondered what could have happened. The giant orc, breaking through the clouds of swirling dust, tried to deliver a decisive blow to his enemy with swift movements, dreaming of finally reaching the enemy and ending the battle with his victory. Edward was in complete shock that the monster remained unharmed after such a devastating spell. In his mind, he found it absurd that his highest level of 4th-tier magic was powerless against a creature that should have collapsed under such an attack. Suddenly, he felt a sudden epiphany, as if the fog had cleared before his eyes, revealing a truth he had previously stubbornly ignored. His heart began to beat faster. His thoughts instantly lined up in a clear chain, leading to an important discovery. The mage suddenly realized that his opponent was not an ordinary orc at all, but a rare representative of his species, a berserker orc of the highest class, known for his inhuman endurance and ability to withstand powerful magical attacks. He clearly understood that although his 4th-tier magic could defeat a normal orc giant against a fearsome berserker, its power would be completely insufficient. Such a creature could withstand much more powerful blows, turning a normal attack into a waste of effort. The adventurer quickly ran away, causing a wave of panic among the residents, since he had no idea how to defeat the dangerous enemy right now. Edward called loudly to the spirit of the atmosphere to respond to his call and begged it to manifest the protective barrier promised earlier. His voice was resolute, reflecting the seriousness of the situation. He quickly activated the 3rd level of the sacred barrier spell, Protection. The space around him instantly glowed with a golden light, forming an invisible wall that reliably protected him from any attack. All the inhabitants were trapped inside the protective barrier, wondering why their protector had created a barrier between them and the outside world. One man pounded his fists on it, trying in vain to understand the nature of the wall and break out, causing the anxiety to spread even more. Edward laughed ominously and cynically informed the villagers that they were merely bait. After all, a nobleman like him could not die in such a remote place. While he quietly left the village, the rest could entertain the beast with themselves. The villagers were shocked by the cruel words and refused to believe that their rescue had turned out to be a trap. They begged him to release them, convinced that this was some kind of evil joke, and sincerely hoped to escape death. However, the monster was getting closer, striking terror into the hearts of the unfortunate captives. Turning around, they noticed a huge berserker orc rapidly approaching them. Heavy footsteps echoed loudly in the air, inspiring genuine horror and despair, making the heart beat faster. The inhabitants froze in panic, realizing the seriousness of the situation. People immediately rushed into a disorderly flight, trying to hide as far away from danger as possible. Panic seized everyone. Faces were distorted with fear. Legs flashed in chaos. Everyone tried to save their own lives, not paying attention to others. Eftal concentrated and activated the 6th-level spell of the Gospel of the Seraphim, Seraphim Scatter. The barrier instantly crumbled, disappearing in bright flashes, freeing the inhabitants from captivity. The adventurer, his slave, and his tutor stood in complete amazement, watching with wide eyes, shock and disbelief on their faces as Eftal's magic broke the wards, freeing the villagers, and turning the tide of battle against Edward. People greeted the destruction of the barrier with delight, feeling the long-awaited freedom. Filled with joy and relief, they immediately scattered, quickly leaving the danger zone and rushing to safe places. Edward stood motionless, dumbfounded that this young boy had managed to dispel his most powerful spell. It seemed absurd and impossible to him that a boy could overcome the protection cast by a high-ranking mage. The teacher was so amazed by what was happening that he was ready to swear that the young man had cast a spell without even uttering a single word. Eftal realized that he had accidentally attracted attention, but it seemed that he had little choice. Watching this orc eat people would be a most unpleasant sight. He thought deeply, pondering his next move. Continuing to openly display his abilities would only attract more attention, which would ruin his plans to remain unnoticed. Suddenly, the young man felt a strange enlightenment, as if a secret had suddenly been revealed to his consciousness. His vision became clearer, his thoughts became distinct, and he immediately understood what decision he would make despite the danger and uncertainty of the future. The boy reasoned to himself that if he disguised his attack as a third-tier level and then instantly strengthened it, no one would be able to recognize the true power of the blow. The young man made the bold decision to use a 9-tier spatial distortion spell, the Spatial Blade, while disguising it as a simple third-tier spell. Later, Eftal will deliberately lie, claiming that he was going to use the 4th level of the spell, but did not have time to do so, being literally on the verge of life and death. This lie would allow him to maintain the illusion of weakness and protect himself from the excessive curiosity of others, and the guy thought it was an excellent plan. The huge orc swung his weapon at the young man, but he, demonstrating miracles of reaction and agility, easily dodged the deadly blow, maintaining composure and calm in his eyes. In his opinion, it would basically look like he had defeated the enemy with a 3rd-level spell, so everything should be fine. The guy cast a 3rd-level spell, Fire Strike. The locals were amazed and astonished to see how a fragile-looking young man could freely wield 3rd-level magic. Eftal slyly thought that while all the spectators were enthusiastically watching the deceptive demonstration of the 3rd level of magic, now was the best time to discreetly use his secret weapon, a 9th-level spell. The young man froze in amazement as he heard the orc's heart-rending screams as he suffered unbearable pain. The pain that consumed his huge body seemed endless and excruciating, turning the battle into a nightmare that took his breath away. He was in a state of complete amazement, not believing his eyes. After all, it seemed that simple 3rd-level magic was enough to defeat a strong opponent. It was unclear how such a technique could lead to such an effect, leaving him in confusion and bewilderment. The villagers rejoiced, delighted that the fragile-looking boy was able to deal with the dangerous berserker orc with only 3rd-level magic. Edward was also deeply perplexed, unable to understand how a simple 3rd level of magic could destroy the berserker, while his own 4th level had no effect. Doubts plagued his mind, giving rise to uncertainty in his own strength and methods of struggle. The huge orc staggered heavily and slowly fell to the ground, letting out a final, muffled roar. The loud sound of the fall shook the area, finally confirming the victory of the little hero over a strong opponent. The teacher added that this magic had been refined and improved over many years, achieving maximum efficiency and precision of execution. It was precisely through long-term work and persistence that such an outstanding result was achieved. He continued his thought, emphasizing that although at first the guy seemed like a simple 3rd-level magician, it was obvious that, in fact, this magic was in the hands of a real enlightened magician with special knowledge and experience. The old man exclaimed that the magic used was partly similar to the magic of the 5th level. Edward noted that it was hard to believe how a teenager of about 14 or 15 years old could master such a complex art. Eftal realized that he had really accomplished the task. The young man thought that practicing and developing magic should be easy, so he didn't pay much attention to it. This blond boy seemed to neglect training altogether, and it was unclear how he even reached rank A. The boy thought that the first stage of magic would have been enough. The young man felt satisfied that he had already shown himself to the public with dignity, but now he was worried about another question. What should he do next? Turning to the audience, the young man wanted to explain what had happened, but suddenly stopped, noticing something unusual. The huge orc berserker continued to burn, engulfed in hellish flames. Bright tongues of fire danced on his skin, emitting acrid smoke filled with the smell of roasted meat. The crowd whispered excitedly, delighted that the guy had roasted the berserker so thoroughly that only coals remained of him. Eftal guessed that to those around him it seemed as if he had used 5th-level magic. He turned to the adventurer and asked if his name was really Edward. Receiving an affirmative nod, he relaxed a little, noting the name of a potential ally or rival. The young man looked at his interlocutor seriously and urged him to show due respect to his elders. His voice sounded firm and authoritative, making it clear that a disdainful attitude was unacceptable and fraught with consequences. The young man noted that the older generation certainly had more knowledge of magic than that magician. The teacher thanked the boy warmly, and he, a little embarrassed, decided to speak out further. He added that Edward's escape attempt could be considered a kind of attempt on human life, and honestly warned that this was only his interpretation, but the act of that adventurer could quite possibly be qualified as a crime. The young man also explained that the criminal had no right to have a slave next to him, and asked him to do the right thing in a humane way, free the girl and voluntarily surrender to justice for the sake of the common good and justice. The girl stood there, embarrassed and happy at the same time, hearing unexpected support from a stranger. Edward reluctantly agreed to the conditions put forward, realizing that further resistance was pointless and dangerous. Eftal said a warm farewell, wishing everyone well and good luck, and then disappeared silently into the twilight, heading back on his quiet journey. His steps became quieter. His figure gradually disappeared into the distance, remaining a mysterious figure in the memories of the locals. The girl watched her departing savior. A faint glimmer of hope lit up in her eyes. It seemed that in him she saw a reflection of a dream of a better fate, free from humiliation and oppression. The boy walked alone across the hot sands of the endless desert. The truth was that the situation had become much more complicated than initially thought. He was well aware that the girl next to him was a slave, bound by the bonds of law and circumstance. She desperately tried to follow him, overcoming fatigue and pain, feeling an inner need to be close to the man who gave her hope and faith in a better future. Despite the difficulties, the girl continued to move after the hero, determined not to fall behind. The young man exclaimed sharply, indignantly, asking the girl how long she was going to pursue him through deserts and cities, preventing him from concentrating on completing an important mission. He noticed that the girl was following him everywhere. The girl tried to say something, but she hesitated nervously, afraid to express her feelings and thoughts out loud. The blond man gave in, admitting defeat, and promised that such an incident would never happen again. His face expressed sincere regret, and his voice trembled from the tension of the situation he had experienced. Now the slave girl who had previously accompanied Edward followed Eftal everywhere. She said that she had gelatin. The young man, puzzled by such words, clarified the meaning of this phrase. The girl, embarrassed, bit her lip, not knowing how to express herself correctly. Having decided to sort out the situation, the guide delicately asked the girl about her true desires. The girl timidly asked the boy to become her new master, providing safety and care in exchange for service. In her words, there was a hope to find the patronage of an honest and noble man, ready to take responsibility for the fate of the girl. Eftal froze, stunned by the girl's sudden request to become her owner and teacher. His brain worked feverishly, weighing the consequences of such a step, realizing the responsibility that came with accepting such a role. She passionately begged him to agree, explaining that a slave without a master was absolutely helpless and deprived of all rights. Without support, she remained a vulnerable victim of injustice and exploitation. The girl sadly added that if she were found without her rightful owner, she would be arrested as a runaway slave and subjected to the most brutal torture and punishment. This prospect frightened her to the depths of her soul, forcing her to seek the protection and patronage of a reliable person. In addition, she emphasized that after her arrest she would certainly be taken to the nearest slave trader, who would put her up for sale, depriving her of any opportunity to independently choose her future fate. Eftal realized that, having the brand of a slave, even the absence of an official owner, did not give the girl a real chance of gaining freedom. He also explained to himself that the slave mark, having lost contact with the previous owner, formally makes the slave free. If she were caught by an unkind person and made a new contract, she would have to endure even greater suffering, up to and including possible death if she disobeyed. The girl said that he seemed to her like a decent young man, and, comparing him with the rude blonde man, she was convinced that he was 1,000,000 times better than the previous owner. The guy readily confirmed that he agreed with her opinion, adding that it was true without a doubt. Then he politely asked her to tell him the story of her fate in more detail, wondering how it happened that the demonic entity ended up in the position of a slave. She began to explain that her native country had been defeated in a war with humans many centuries ago, after which her people had fallen into complete subjugation. Being born into slavery, the girl had known no other life than slavery. The boy listened to the story and was filled with sympathy for her fate. Eftal understood that slaves who were captured could rarely change their low social status without going through a lot of formal procedures. This reality was cruel, but unfortunately common in their world. Apparently, she was a member of the royal line of demons, a relative of the current headmaster of the Altina Academy, one of the most prestigious schools of magic for demons. In fact, she is a distant relative of Merlin Sama. The girl sadly added that, despite her high birth, she was forced to be in such a shameful position as a slave, deprived of the right to vote and dignity. This bitter fate weighed on her soul, making life unbearable. The young man raised his head in surprise, exclaimed, and asked her again, wanting to make sure that he had heard such an incredible confession correctly. The girl cautiously asked if he really doubted her noble origin. The young man replied that he was not talking about that. Eftal asked again if she was talking about the famous student of Eftal himself, one of the 4 emperors, known as Merlin. She looked at him in surprise, realizing who exactly he meant by the name Merlin. The girl clarified that Merlin Sama was indeed raised by Eftal, one of the 4 emperors, the most legendary and wise among them. She herself belongs to the number of exceptional sorceresses, standing at the top of the hierarchy even among her own demonic kind. The young man realized that Merlin had a child. About 4 centuries had passed, and now she had taken the position of head of the Demon Witchcraft Academy, having reached the highest heights of skill and recognition. Eftal chuckled softly, realizing that 4 centuries had passed since he had last seen Merlin. Much had changed in that time, including the power structure and political alliances among the demons. He added that, given the longevity of half-vampire girls, it was natural for her to live several hundred years. Logic suggested that a representative of a noble family could live to such a venerable age. Taking this into account, the young man immediately made an important decision. The guy seriously said that he would temporarily take on the role of her teacher and patron, promising to protect and support the girl in the coming days of the journey. The decisiveness of his tone calmed the girl's nerves, instilling confidence in the future, and she looked at him with hope. The girl joyfully clasped her hands, sincerely thanking the new owner for his trust and understanding. Eftal, in turn, admitted that he never expected to meet such a close relative of the legendary Merlin in this remote corner of the earth, considering the meeting a real miracle. He looked at her intently and decided to ask an important question. The young man asked the girl's name with interest, wanting to get to know her better. Anastasia, smiling a little embarrassedly, quietly said her name, feeling the ease of communication with her new acquaintance. The guy sincerely hoped that they could establish good relations with each other, despite the difference in status and experience. The girl gently asked the master to take care of her, relying on the kindness and compassion of the new patron. The travelers successfully reached the city of Darmstadt. Eftal breathed a sigh of relief, glad that they had managed to reach the city before sunset. The master cheerfully informed Anastasia that he had arrived specifically to participate in the entrance examination to the Academy of Witchcraft, which would take place tomorrow morning right in this city. She asked with interest whether the magician intended to pass the exams on par with ordinary students. Eftal smiled good-naturedly and confirmed her assumption, causing the girl's surprise and admiration. The student sincerely admitted that she would never have thought that he would study. The young man, laughing, suggested starting with finding a suitable place to stay, because rest was necessary before the upcoming tests. Anastasia's stomach growled loudly, reminding her of the need to eat. She blushed deeply and was embarrassed, had misunderstood everything. Eftal reassured her, hinting that such little things happen to everyone. He suggested that we first go have a snack to restore our strength and gain energy. They stopped at the restaurant Limit Steak, famous for its meat. Anastasia, in a whisper, asked if visiting such an establishment was too expensive. The master asked the girl not to worry about finances, because today was a special occasion. She noted with embarrassment that she had no money at all. Eftal smiled, saying that it was not a problem, because on such a significant day, for which he had been preparing for a long time, he planned to eat meat until he was full. They entered the establishment, where they were greeted warmly and shown to a table for 2. Anastasia looked around furtively, noting the elegant interior and refined atmosphere, mentally agreeing that the restaurant really did give the impression of being an expensive and prestigious place. The restaurant's patrons looked closely at the newly arrived guests. A disgruntled murmur arose among the visitors. Someone condemningly said that it was not customary to bring slaves to a decent establishment. Others were surprised how a young boy, looking 14-15 years old, managed to visit such expensive restaurants. Anastasia felt a sharp pang of shame, lowered her head, and stole a glance at the master, immersed in dreams of meat. They were invited to sit down at the indicated table. Eftal politely thanked the waiter. Eftal smiled encouragingly and said that today there was no need to limit herself, suggesting that the girl enjoy the food so that she would be full to the brim. Suddenly, he noticed that Anastasia, contrary to expectations, was not sitting at the table. The master suddenly lost sight of his companion and, with growing anxiety, began to call out loudly to her, trying to determine her location. He, noticing the girl's presence, asked in surprise why she had decided to stay here, especially as a slave. Anastasia, smiling sheepishly, admitted that she had already sat down. Then Eftal kindly pointed to a special soft seat intended for her, installed next to the main table. The girl looked at the seat offered to her with undisguised surprise, hardly believing that she, an ordinary slave, was allowed to take a place of honor at the restaurant's common table. The boy wondered why she was asking obvious questions again. Anastasia objected that the correct behavior of a slave was to kneel before the master and be ready to immediately carry out any order. The young man replied that she no longer had to behave like that with him. The student could not accept the new behavior, considering it inappropriate. Eftal wondered how deeply ingrained the slave habits were in her, and commanded her imperiously as her master. He kindly invited her to sit at the common table and enjoy the food as a regular guest, without embarrassment or ceremony. The guide tried to create a comfortable atmosphere, helping her forget about old habits and learn to live freely and naturally. The young man, sitting down opposite, noted approvingly that the chairs in the restaurant were excellent and surprisingly comfortable. Anastasia sat down and admitted that the chair was indeed very comfortable. Eftal reminded her that he had warned her about this. The waiter was annoyed by the child's behavior. The young man thoughtfully flipped through the pages of the menu, wondering what to order. An angry waiter approached him impatiently. The man sternly explained that in this elite establishment, slaves are strictly forbidden to take a seat at the dining tables. Moreover, the employee emphasized that this establishment is frequented by famous and influential people, being a high-class restaurant. The appearance of the young man, who looked like a student from the provinces, contrasted with the general atmosphere of elitism and wealth. The waiter, observing the official form of address, respectfully inquired about the young guest's funds. Anastasia tensed up, overwhelmed by the staff's attention and fearing the consequences of a possible refusal. The restaurant worker dryly remarked that the young man had probably been brought in by mistake by an employee, as the establishment was not intended for students. The waiter's tone made it clear that the newcomer was clearly not up to the high standard of such establishments. Anastasia offered a compromise, apologizing that she was ready to sit on the floor, and addressing the master, she specified that if the problem was in the presence of the slave, they could pick up the order and eat outside. Eftal insisted negatively that there were no problems, and everything would remain as planned. The young man pulled several large gemstones out of his pocket, causing the waiter to gasp in surprise. The glittering crystals convincingly proved the client's solvency, eliminating any doubts about the financial side of the matter. Eftal, placing the stones on the table with dignity, asked the worker if this amount was enough to pay for the lunch and cover possible expenses. The guy straightened his coat and explained that such stones were quite common in his native land, so he did not lack funds. Confident speech and a calm look added solidity to the image of the young traveler, inspiring respect in those around him. The waiter froze, amazed by the sight of the precious stones known as dragon tears. He exclaimed in amazement that these were gems created from the secretion of the Kaiser's dragon. Such purity was almost impossible. He wondered if the client was from the mountainous regions of Azul, where such treasures were worth their weight in gold. Even one stone of this size was worth 50 gold coins. Frightened by his own rashness, the waiter publicly apologized deeply to the customers, fervently assuring them that their reception would be impeccable. Eftal calmly let the incident go and ordered the choicest cuts of meat available to the restaurant to be served. The restaurant worker respectfully stated that the master's wishes were his command and ordered his colleague to stop serving other customers and concentrate on preparing food for the guests. He then ordered that the honored guests be escorted to a separate VIP room. Eftal understood that his mother had given him these precious stones as traveling aids, although in fact they belonged to his father. Having served generous portions of choice meat, the restaurant staff bowed respectfully to the guests, expressing their respect. Anastasia, amazed by the quantity and quality of the treats, could hardly believe her own eyes, realizing that such feasts were available only to rich and noble families. The young man smiled with relief, pleased that the restaurant staff understood his request and fulfilled it without objection. The guy asked the girl what was wrong and asked her to stop being shy and start eating. Anastasia shared that she was facing such an attitude for the first time and asked if she was allowed to eat. The master explained that from now on, they would spend a lot of time together, so it was worth getting used to the changes. Eftal asked the girl to perceive today's dinner as a small celebration, arranged especially for her. Let her not be shy and eat with pleasure. He added that otherwise the meat would cool down and lose its delicious taste, and what if she did not like the meat at all? Anastasia hastened to assure him that she was fine and very pleased with the invitation. The master, smiling, confirmed that he was glad to hear such words, and the young man decided to add something else. He thoughtfully shared that he believed the student had faced many hardships and suffered much abuse due to her status as a slave. The girl quietly confirmed the truth of his words, recalling her difficult life path, full of suffering. The young man sincerely admitted that he could not guarantee that he would never lose his temper and treat her badly. Therefore, if this happens, she can safely be offended and angry at him. Anastasia asked in surprise what she meant by angry. Eftal realized that years of slavery had erased from her consciousness the ability to express negative emotions, replacing them with a passive acceptance of pressure and humiliation. The master explained to her that this meant the ability to refuse what she was not happy with or did not like. Anastasia opened her mouth in surprise, not believing her ears. Eftal, noticing her reaction, smiled softly and continued to eat calmly, demonstrating that changes are possible and necessary to free oneself from imposed restrictions. The student listened attentively to the boy's instructions and accepted his advice with sincere gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt loved and important, gaining confidence in her right to demand better treatment and living conditions. The young man remembered that this reminded him of the ideal strategy for getting rid of slave habits. He suggested that Anastasia engage in practical exercises aimed at overcoming complexes and fears. At first, the girl did not understand the meaning of the proposals. The boy asked her to try to get angry with him. She considered such behavior unacceptable towards a teacher, but Eftal assured her that it was normal and useful, asking her to take a risk and try. Anastasia tried to express her anger, but again she nervously bit her lip, clearly unable to cope with her emotions. The master, noticing her difficulties, smiled understandingly, laughing at the funny situation. The long-awaited day of entrance exams to the Kron Witchcraft Academy has arrived. The protagonist and his companion finally arrived at the Kron Academy of Witchcraft, where the exam will take place. The couple immediately noticed how huge it was. After the admiration passed, Eftal was confused and could not find the reception, but after looking around, he found a sign. Anastasia awkwardly turned to her master. She showed him her outfit and happily thanked him for the new clothes. Eftal was glad that she liked the clothes, and said that she no longer had to wear those inappropriate clothes all the time. The girl nodded in agreement. As they moved further, the magician was surprised by what he saw ahead. The noise of the crowd grew louder as they moved toward the registration desk. Anastasia clearly hadn't expected to see so many wizards. Such a large number of people is explained by the entrance exams to the Academy of Witchcraft, because there is always a particularly high competition for them. The girl noticed that her master emphasized the word especially and hurried to find out why. At that time, one of the academy workers announced that everyone who takes the test must first register with him. All those who graduate from the Academy of Witchcraft can be divided into 3 branches: elite, specialists, guild. Simply put, a graduate of the Witchcraft Academy will not worry about finding a job, so a lot of people come to take the exam. Having explained to his subordinate the reason for such a large number of people present, he suddenly became happy, remembering something, thereby confusing Anastasia. With complete confidence, the guy suggested that the demoness try to pass the exam. The girl was stunned by this suggestion. She couldn't believe that she could participate in this. The magician reassured her that this exam, unlike those with quotas for the direction, could be taken by anyone. If the girl did well, she would learn several skills to get a job. With these words, she agreed. Not hearing a refusal, Eftal decided everything for himself and told the worker that they would both take the exam. Anastasia's panic only increased. The demoness was overcome by despondency because she was not confident in her abilities. The guy enthusiastically thought that she would cope. He knew about demons for a long time, and their achievements in magic are much better than those of ordinary people. So she had a noticeable magical aura. To cheer her up, Eftal said that Anastasia was still distantly connected to Merlin. If she could use magic at least a little, then everything would be fine. The man at the reception desk apologized for the delay in preparing the entry numbers and gave the couple numbers 508 and 509. Having taken the numbers, the magician moved forward, inviting the girl to follow him. The demoness was taken aback, but hurried after her master. One of the organizers invited everyone who had registered to go inside the Colosseum, where participants would find examination areas. Hearing the announcement, Eftal assumed that they needed to go in the same direction as the crowd. The pair confidently headed through the tunnel. The team went into the Colosseum, saw its scale, and in the middle there was a huge field for training battles. Seeing the murderous looks of some of the participants, Anastasia fearfully turned to the master, saying that it seemed to her that there were many strong opponents here. Before the couple had even taken their seats, a loud voice was heard addressing the person taking the exam, after which a man came out on stage. A system window appeared, announcing that this was B-rank adventurer Franz Bauer. He was the supervisor of the first stage. The man introduced himself and announced that the first stage of the exam, a battle, was about to begin. At the beginning, 50 participants will compete in the arena. Those who fall out of the arena will be replaced, and the battle will continue until 5 remain. These 5 people will pass the first stage of the exam. Participants can use anything, be it magic or weapons. The main thing is to push the opponents out of the arena. With each new phrase, Franz spoke louder. After he explained the rules, the man invited the first 50 people to climb into the arena. Anastasia whispered that his speech was rather indifferent. The warden was about to move away from the edge of the stage, but upon hearing the demoness's words, he turned around and defiantly asked if she had just called him indifferent. The girl was frightened when she realized that he had heard her. Eftal covered the girl with himself, protecting her from Bauer's attacks. The adventurer was angered by Anastasia's phrase, and he explained to her, since she did not understand, that his job was to search for uncut diamonds. All the competent magicians came with letters of recommendation and skipped the first part of the exam, and all those who stand before the overseer are incompetent. The Frenchman doesn't care what family the participants come from. He doesn't want to waste his precious time on them. And, in general, they should be grateful that they can take this exam. Eftal took the overseer's words into account. At that moment, the adventurer had an idea, and he said that if the couple wanted him to mark them so much, he could do it. Bauer ordered the team to enter the arena. He then laughed and added ominously that they should try not to do anything reckless, like leave the arena on their own. Franz encouraged the other participants to not be shy about going up to the arena. Wanting to show off, many shouted and raised their hands to get into the arena. Eftal took Anastasia's hand encouragingly and led her confidently into the arena. The girl did not resist, trusting her master. The magician was not worried about the battle, and only after he saw the worried face of his companion did he turn his attention to the opponents who were looking at the couple with poisonous interest. Even before the test began, other magicians approached the main character, which greatly frightened the demoness. The guy realized that the opponents decided to start with them, since their team looked weak. Anastasia warned the master that she would not be able to cope in close combat. This did not disappoint Eftal. He only asked the girl to stay behind him. She hesitantly agreed, relying on his strength. Franz Bauer announced the start of the exam, and everyone immediately rushed to attack the main character. After the man made his announcement, he went up to the platform above. His name was Franz Bauer. For a B-rank traveler like him, being the supervisor of this exam was simply amazing. It's safe, and you can earn as much as you would from hunting monsters. There's no more relaxing job in the world. By the way, Franz has already looked at 200 participants, but has not found a single strong and promising candidate. The man laughed, thinking about being paid to look after children. Casually enough, the warden glanced into the arena to check out this year's newcomers. Eftal put his bag aside so it wouldn't interfere with his fencing and prepared for battle. Anastasia looked around nervously, not knowing what to do. The warden watched as the other contestants surrounded the two to attack. After all, the undisputed key to winning this battle royale was to start with the one who seemed the weakest. Franz mentally apologized for singling out the mage and demoness, since they were now the main target. But before he could come to his senses, someone somersaulted over his head. It was one of the mages who had fought against Eftal. His appearance shocked Bauer. His landing knocked the tablet and pen out of the warden's hands. The man did not understand what was happening. The participants flew in different directions, causing complete confusion in Franz. The main character sent another opponent flying. The participants could not believe their eyes, but looking at one of the monitors, it turned out that 9 people were eliminated. Franz was stunned, but found a simple explanation for what was happening. The boy strengthened his legs to defeat his opponents. Eftal knows how to use physical charms. Bauer calmed down and looked down on the guy. The other participants who had not yet left the arena knew that they could not win until they defeated Elcott. It's just a battle royale, where everyone who can attacks a participant. Eftal put his hand on his sword in anticipation. Anastasia was worried about the master and asked him to take care, but he instantly repelled any attacks. While defending himself, the mage enjoyed the sparring. He increased his attack a little and scattered 5 more participants. The warden was still watching the people flying away and could not take seriously what he saw. Franz was amazed by this young magician. Eftal defeats them without leaving Anastasia's side. Such a monstrous swordsman cannot exist among A-rank travelers. Bauer treats him too lightly. Perhaps this guy could be a great find. The supervisor turned his attention to the other participants and realized that some of the students realized that Alcott was protecting the girl and were now planning to attack her. Franz became curious about what the swordsman was going to do in this situation, because repelling attacks and protecting a friend was not so easy. Eftal called Anastasia to action, and she began to chant, "Children of the wind, frolicking in the atmosphere, answer the call with your breath." Wind enslavement. Level 3, self-kiss. Hearing the spell level from her mouth, the attackers were very scared, but it was too late. Everyone was blown away screaming by a gust of wind. This did not go unnoticed and caused shock in Bauer and admiration in Alcott. Having seen the power of the demoness, the warden could not come to his senses. Another 16 people dropped out, and the warden asked the next ones to go to the site. The participants were tense and did not want to believe what was happening. This is not the level of magic that a student taking the entrance exam would have. The other examinees did not understand why this girl was taking the entrance exam to the Witchcraft Academy. Hearing what they were saying about her, Anastasia blushed and turned to the master. It seemed to her that she had gone too far. But Eftal calmed her down, because the girl had done everything as he expected. He asked with a grin if Anastasia really had talent. She was embarrassed and thanked the magician. But Alcott wanted to clarify one point. The guy was interested in whether a spell was really needed to use magic. The girl didn't know what to answer him. The other participants were dumbfounded by his question, while Franz was puzzled and grinned. Bauer couldn't help but laugh hysterically and called it genius, thinking that the guy didn't even know the basics of magic. Anastasia awkwardly explained that it was natural. If you don't cast a spell, you can't summon magic. But Eftal knew that wasn't true. As he prepared to use magic, the mage questioned her worldview, asking if she could do something like that without casting a spell. Afterwards, Alcott cast the spell, Tempest, level 4, Self-Depths. Without saying a word, Eftal used parallel activation. Seeing the guy use 4 levels at once, Franz had a fit of hysterics. The other magicians were scared and thought they were being mocked. There was an explosion of unprecedented force, which sent most of the participants flying outside the Colosseum. Some people didn't even have a chance to grab onto anything, and the warden was struggling to hold on, even though he was a good distance from the epicenter. Anastasia stood behind the main character, so she got off with only slight bewilderment. The girl was amazed, because doing something like that without a spell is something incredible. Despite the commotion, Eftal looked pleased with himself. The demoness didn't notice then, but the master didn't cast the spell last time either. She was amazed by his skills. At the same time, Alcott finally realized that he had overdone it. The warden was able to raise his head after such a devastating spell. His surprise and fear knew no bounds. Some of the dust had settled and the effects were already visible. Franz was sure that this was impossible. He was interested in the question of who these two were. While he was floating in the clouds, Eftal called out to him. The man's nose began to run from fear when he realized that they were addressing him. Anastasia and her master showed Bauer their numbers. Alcott said that seemed to be all. The other participants were in a sorry state, and the warden tried to look relaxed, despite the fact that he was shaking. Franz stuttered as he announced that numbers 588 and 589th had passed their first exam. The protagonist was glad to hear this, because now they had broken through the first barrier. Despite her uncertainty, Anastasia firmly supported the master. This means that tomorrow there will be a second exam or a final exam, and it is written. In Eftal's past life, he was so obsessed with learning that he was nicknamed the Emperor of Learning. If there is nothing unusual on the exam, the protagonist will cope with the written assignment. Since he didn't have much talent to be on par with other emperors, all the guy did was ruthlessly devote himself to finding his own theoretical innovations. Parallel activation is one of them. However, in the end, the new theories that Eftal discovered were just as easily surpassed by talented people like them. The boy remembered the words of the Fire Emperor. He said that he needed strong magic barriers, not weak ones. The guy remembered something painful and thought that talented people will always have an advantage. Then his gaze fell on his companion, and he wondered what feelings Anastasia was experiencing now. The girl quietly asked if the exam would really take place tomorrow. Eftal, slightly confused, confirmed her words. She sadly admitted that she had been prepared for the role of an obedient servant, but now, before the exam, she was overcome with excitement. The guy felt genuinely sorry for his girlfriend, and he reassuringly noted that her worries were completely natural. Inwardly, he thought that even without talent, he was obliged to give promising talents a chance to grow. Eftal said enthusiastically that they would now return to the hotel, and he would show her how to study. The girl seemed embarrassed. Anastasia asked incredulously if it was true, to which the guy good-naturedly answered in the affirmative, since he himself had suggested it. The delighted demoness warmly thanked her master. While they were busy, the next day arrived. The guy yawned loudly as he and his companion walked back to the Krona Academy of Witchcraft. They had to get to the street of the 456th final exam. Anastasia was worried about the master's condition. He waved her off and assured her that he was a little sleepy, but everything was fine. The demoness apologized for the fact that he had to teach her until the morning. Eftal hardly studied at all himself, but in his past life the protagonist studied a lot, so that should be enough. Just at that moment, one of the teachers approached them. He placed a large test on the protagonist's desk. The magician did not expect to see such a large stack of questions. Once all the examinees had been given their tests, another teacher announced that the written exam for the Krona Academy of Witchcraft would begin from now on. Time was limited, so as much as the novice mages could do was needed. Eftal and Anastasia were determined. Now the curtain would rise. The teacher announced the start, and everyone immediately began writing the test. After a while, they announced the end of the exam. Eftal, gathering his last strength, announced that they were finished. Anastasia asked the master how the exam had gone. The guide tiredly replied that, although the number of questions was insane, he had somehow managed to answer them all. The girl was surprised, asking again if he had really solved every task. The boy, somewhat puzzled by her reaction, confirmed that it was necessary to pass the exam. The demoness, embarrassed, awkwardly objected that it was not so. This is a free choice exam, so you don't have to answer all the questions. Alcott was discouraged and did not believe in the seriousness of her words. But Anastasia asked him a counter-question. Did the magician see the explanation on the first page where it was written? The guy didn't read the rules, but immediately started solving, which he now began to regret. The demoness decided to add that it was necessary to answer what could be solved in each of the 20 sections. Thus, it would be enough to answer 30% of all questions to get a passing score. To begin with, wizards usually don't know magical theory outside of their specialization, so this is a free choice exam. Eftal has a special case. He answered all the questions, because he knew them all, but only 30% is enough to pass. If this is true, then it is unknown what might happen to the magician in this case. A shout was heard in one of the academy buildings because one of the exam participants scored 958 points. The teachers began to discuss the test heatedly. Some thought he was crazy, while others had never even heard of such high scores before. Director Lucent was indignant, stating that something like this had happened for the first time since the founding of the Academy, and demanded to know who did it. Perhaps this magician had copied it or done something like that. Those present were informed that the candidate in question was number 588, Eftal Elcott, a boy who bore the same name as the Thunder Emperor. The old man, thinking out loud, noted that for them, as seekers of magic, there was nothing more shameful than this to share a name with one of the 4 great emperors. The director, still indignant, began to assert that the young man had certainly copied, but before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted. At that moment, someone burst into the office, begging him to wait. Franz came to the teachers and, apologizing for his tactlessness, told them everything that happened during the first exam related to the main character. Everyone present was shocked to hear about the parallel activation of the 4th level. To be able to conjure the 4th level, this is already the level of an elite school of witchcraft. It turned out that among the teachers of this academy, there is not a single one who could do this. Considering all the possibilities shown in the first exam, Eftal's highest score could not be a mistake. The entire teaching staff pondered what was happening. The director broke the general silence and, turning to the warden, said that this could be the second Thunder Emperor. One of the professors asked Lucent what to do. The old man thought about it and a little later began to reason that this Eftal was making a strange impression. It was necessary to understand what to do with him in the end. The day of the exam results arrived. The couple came to see the lists, but it was difficult to see anything when so many people had gathered. Then the guy suggested splitting up, and the girl supported him. The main character, with bated breath, looked for his number on every board he approached. Anastasia rushed at her master with screams and tears, which greatly puzzled him. It turned out that she had found her number and was asking the magician to verify what she had seen. After all, she had entered a special class. The demoness pointed to one of the lists, and Alcott saw her number. It read, Special Class, number 5089, Anastasia. The girl continued to hang on the young man, which is why unwitting witnesses thought that they were together. When Anastasia heard them, she blushed and began to apologize to the guy, explaining that she was just excited. Eftal began to calm her down, referring to the fact that everything was fine. The main character congratulated the girl on passing the exam and noted that now she can live a normal student life. The girl sheepishly thanked the master for helping her with her training, after which the magician began looking for his number with interest. Alcott, confused, began to look for his name on the lists, but the more he ran, the less positive he felt. He was ready to swear that he had passed the exam, and all this seemed strange to the guy. Anastasia asked what had happened to the master. The guy answered in confusion that he could not find his number. The demoness muttered in confusion that the situation seemed strange to her. Eftal wondered with disappointment whether it was because he had overdone it in the arena, or perhaps his magical abilities had been measured without his knowledge, and because of that, he had failed. The girl, hurriedly turning to him, said that this was completely unacceptable, and she intended to file a complaint. However, he objected that it was not worth doing. Otherwise, it would become even more inconvenient, and now everything was fine. Suddenly, the girl stopped, noticing something strange, to which the guy asked in surprise what she had found. The column said that candidate number 588, Eftal Alcott, had won first place in the written examination. He was a representative of special students. Seeing this, the girl was surprised by the phrase special student, and the guy did not have time to realize that he had passed after all. Anastasia turned to the master and said that she expected nothing less from him than to pass with special distinction. The magician answered hesitantly that everything was indeed fine, although deep down he had mixed feelings. He was happy with the pass, but worried about what was meant by special student representative and what duties would be assigned to him. The girl noticed that those who had passed the exams had already been enrolled and suggested that they go. She added that it sounded amazing to be a representative of special students and asked the master to pay attention to the fact that, apparently, such students had their own bonuses. 1. Cancellation of basic education. 2. Provided with special allowance. 3. Representation of students. 4. Attendance at internal events on an equal basis with teachers. 5. Have public relations as a representative of the Academy at events held by the kingdom. An exasperated Eftal realized that he would be forced to work as an advertiser instead of being a student. This was not what he wanted. Sneaking into the library after school while no one is watching and looking for breakthroughs and magical abilities, the main character painted such an ideal student life in his head. The young man was worried not only because of his exclusivity, but also because he could not give up his privileges. Suddenly, Alcott was distracted from his thoughts by noticing something. An adult demoness walks down the corridor, accompanied by 2 teachers. Seeing the demoness, the guy was shocked and mentally exclaimed, not believing his eyes. The magician abruptly hid behind a column, wondering what Merlin was doing there. While Eftal was hiding, the teachers were escorting her to an unknown destination. He peered out carefully and made sure he was not mistaken. Watching the girl, he noticed that she had grown up, but she looked exactly the same. It was indeed Merlin. The main character now looked a little like he did in his past life. If Merlin, who knew him in his past life, looked at the young man now, she would definitely see the resemblance and understand who he is. In any case, now is not the best time for them to meet. If the reincarnation of one of the 4 emperors were to be exposed in a place where there is someone like her, it would be terrible. Alcott turned to Anastasia and offered to show her the academy from the inside, pointing in the opposite direction from his first student. The girl hesitantly agreed. At that moment, Merlin felt goosebumps all over her body. The girl suddenly felt the presence of the master. She turned around sharply, guided by her feelings. Not seeing anyone behind her, she was upset because he couldn't be alive. But seeing the guy who was quickly hiding from her, she immediately rushed towards him and screamed for him to stop. Out of breath, Merlin stood in front of him, which caused confusion in the protagonist. The demoness did not know how or what to tell him. Eftal was only disappointed that he could not hide and wondered what would happen now. Merlin, suggesting to get straight to the point. After some embarrassment, but quite confidently, she asked if the young man had any connection with the Thunder Emperor. Eftal hesitated to answer, overcome with panic, and began to look around restlessly, realizing that Merlin had sensed something after all. Now that the protagonist has been accepted into the academy, it would be a shame if something were to cause him to be expelled. Eftal muttered in confusion that he didn't quite understand what was going on. At the same time, he mentally apologized to Merlin. Suddenly, a brilliant idea came to his mind and he exclaimed that he was very hungry. Anastasia, at first, did not understand his impulse. The magician had already grabbed her hand and enthusiastically announced that it was time for lunch. The girl asked again in confusion, hesitantly agreed, but asked anxiously about registration. Alcott quickly assured that they would run there later. Merlin wanted to stop the couple, so she called out to them, demanding that they wait. The girl watched Eftalu leave, and this situation clearly did not give her any peace. The protagonist could not hide his surprise when he learned that Anastasia did not know who it was. She replied sheepishly that she had no idea that the girl was her relative. The demoness is ashamed to admit that she has never seen her in person. Anastasia's answer made the magician reconsider some of his assumptions. Alcott was saved in a way because this was his companion's first meeting with Merlin. If they had started a conversation, he probably wouldn't have been able to stop them. The guy saw the dialogue between his former and current companions in vivid colors. Merlin is the daughter of the Demon King. Anastasia heard from her relatives that 10 generations ago, the head of the family was the Demon King himself, so she told the master that they were related. Eftal was surprised, but now it was clear why they had acted like strangers, because 10 generations ago was an insanely long time ago. The guy began to think, noting to himself that she was not at all like Anastasia. However, it was much more important to understand the reason for Merlin's appearance. She is the head of the Alton Witchcraft Academy, and was now at the Kron Witchcraft Academy. He was overcome with anxiety about her possibly coming here to teach. He prayed that it would not be true. And so the main character and his companion went to the academy for the first time as a student. After everyone had gathered, they began to give an introductory speech to their first-year friends. The principal congratulated them on their enrollment in his famous Kron Academy of Witchcraft. Today, they all became students. Special classes, honorary classes, and general classes. Also gifted students. And although everyone's classes were different, Principal Lucent wanted them to study hard, following the path of witchcraft together. Today, Master Merlin, having overcome all barriers, being the head of the prestigious School of Witchcraft Altena, honored the first years with her visit. Many students were delighted with her, only Eftal was nervous, and Anastasia was surprised. Merlin introduced herself and congratulated everyone on their enrollment. While she was giving a speech, the protagonist was finding out the reason for her appearance. The guy let out a nervous breath when he found out that she didn't work at his academy, but he needed to do something after the ceremony before something serious happened. But as soon as the young man exhaled, the director announced that it was time for the representative of the incoming class to say a few words. It was a special student, Eftal Alcott. As soon as the boy heard his name, he remembered his disadvantage. Merlin walked back to her seat when a student with the same name as her master was announced. Alcott was in despair. He timidly began to raise his hand, realizing that all was bad. The magician realized that everything was very bad. If everyone knew him now, she would definitely understand everything. Some didn't know him, but they were alarmed by the fact that Eftal had the same name as the Thunder Emperor. Some knew from gossip that he had written the exam with the highest score in the history of the academy, and some had heard how the young man had destroyed the arena during the exam. The protagonist felt uncomfortable. He wanted everyone to stop accidentally telling Merlin unnecessary details. The demoness was glaring at Alcott, and he wanted to run away right then and there, but he went on stage and gave a short speech. That was the end of the enrollment ceremony. The young man lay on his desk, head down, remembering how dire the situation at the ceremony had been. Looking up, Eftal saw a crowd of enchanted girls around him, each trying to draw his attention to themselves. Listening to the girls cooing with the main character, Anastasia thought with resentment that she was the first to find the master. At that moment, Merlin burst into the classroom, shocking the students. The demoness placed the papers on Alcott's desk and stated that she had heard a lot about him. The girls didn't like the newcomer's familiarity, but Merlin wanted to discuss an urgent matter, so she wasn't going to back down. Only now did the girls realize who they were talking to and how. They quickly apologized and ran away in fear. She continued to look menacingly after them for some time. Looking at the demoness, the magician remembered Merlin in childhood and came to the conclusion that she had grown up quite stern. The girl, with the magician's permission, began calling Eftal. There was no point in introducing herself, since the guy already knew her name, and that meant that they could start a conversation. Merlin awkwardly, but hopefully, asked if the young man knew the meaning of the word reincarnation. The boy was dumbfounded, because his former student had always been perceptive, but she had suddenly hit the nail on the head. Alcott pretended not to understand what she was talking about, but Merlin had prepared herself and looked at his exam results. This result looks as if one of the four greats wrote the exam for fun. Moreover, most of the teachers of this academy could not understand the thought process of the young man during the exam. The girl asked him defiantly if he knew the reason. The guy said, confused, that he didn't know. Merlin stated that the protagonist's exam is completely consistent with the magical theories that existed 400 years ago. Some students had already begun to pay attention to their dialogue, but the girl did not pay attention to the others and only wanted an explanation from Eftal. The magician was stalling for time, but in his head he already knew the reason. He hadn't taken into account the difference in time periods, as all the questions were fairly simple. Looking at him now, Merlin seemed to have come to terms with the fact that the main character resembled a person from her past. The demoness added that the man was dear to her. This confession astounded Alcott. Throwing aside all thoughts, the girl apologized for her words and explained that she had inadvertently thought that the young man might be related to her master. Even if she was hasty in calling it reincarnation, Eftal definitely has a certain connection with the Great Thunder Emperor. Merlin added, turning to Alcott when he ran away from her. Most likely it was due to not wanting to face because of that relationship. She assumed that there must be a good reason for such an action, but this is just her guess. Eftal confirmed that it was indeed a reincarnation, admitting that Merlin had seen through him correctly. The girl, clearly embarrassed, began to say something hesitantly, but did not finish the sentence. The whole conversation played out in the young man's head, and he mentally added that life would be easier if he had the opportunity to tell her the truth, but he could not do so. The students in the cafeteria began to discuss the conversation between the protagonist and his former student. Alcott was ready to invent anything just to learn witchcraft. To sound more convincing, the young man began to whisper, looking around, that the emperor had a mistress. If Merlin was not 100% sure that she was right, then the guy would tell her the story that she wanted to hear. The demoness asked the main character again, as she was so surprised that she could not believe his words. Eftal repeated, in a deliberately slow and affected manner, that the Thunder Emperor and his mistress had a child. The child had amazing talents, and the emperor gave him all the knowledge of witchcraft that he had. This child was hidden and lived in the mountains, far from civilization, and half of his family became hermits to hone their skills. The whole story was a lie. Hearing the boy's story, Merlin lost her temper and stopped him. She was sure that it was impossible, because the girl had never heard about it before. In conclusion, the young man added that the emperor died in despair due to the lack of talent for magic. The demoness should know this part of the story. The girl stood in a stupor. Eftal wanted to add something, but she instantly pressed him to herself, covering his mouth. Merlin explained her behavior in a whisper, because this moment in history is known only to those close to one of the four emperors and is usually kept secret. You can't reveal the secrets of others, especially among unfamiliar magicians. The demoness stated that if he was aware of this fact, it could only mean one thing. She suddenly hesitated. The magician, interrupting her, confirmed that he was indeed Eftal Alcott VIII, whose existence was unknown to society, but this did not change the real state of affairs. Internally, the protagonist felt guilty, mentally apologizing to Merlin and asking her to accept this lie. She took his words sadly. The girl was confused because she did not know about such an important detail of her master's life. Merlin said that she was now interested in which of the two was stronger. These words literally made the boy's hair stand on end. The girl continued that it wasn't only the boy's family that followed the path of the Thunder Emperor, trying to become the strongest. The demoness, like the magician, constantly honed her magic. Eftal remembered that Merlin, from that very day 400 years ago, remains himself to this day. She reminded the boy about the practice match that would start after lunch. Alcott did not want to participate, as he had been ordered to lose. The first years are not like the teaching staff, and the boy participates to remind them of this. Merlin offered Eftal a fight with her in the training magic arena. The guy did not know how to answer her to such a challenge. If the magician did something like that, he would definitely give himself away. It could even be the end of his aspirations. The young man could simply refuse, but he had a desire. Even now, the main character wants to see how his student Merlin has grown. And now the former master and his student will meet in battle. A special demonstration battle begins, in which representatives of those admitted to the enrollment ceremony participate. An unexpected special guest, Master Merlin, who has decided to release the demons, will personally demonstrate her mastery of witchcraft for the sake of everyone present. The crowd of students cheered. They couldn't wait to see the demoness's magic in real life, because it was an excellent lesson for beginner magicians. Eftal had his own fan club, supporting him from the stands. The guy suggested starting with a basic test. Merlin was not against it. They agreed that the main character would attack first. The boy attacked with a spell, level 6 Explosion of Flames, Ultimate Ring of Fire. The demoness was surprised that Alcott did not cast a spell. There was a terrifying explosion, the shockwave of which reached the spectators. A satisfied girl's voice could be heard from behind the smoke. She didn't expect that a spell of such a high level would be a basic test for the guy. Merlin also admitted that she underestimated Eftal. She immediately blocked the attack with a level 7, Absolute Strength, Perfect Wall. The young man expected nothing less from the demoness. Alcott had mastered level 6 well at a young age, and the girl noted that she had no choice but to acknowledge his claims. However, that was not all she had to say. Merlin also has pride, and she may not belong to this family even in the 13th generation, but she is the favorite disciple of the first generation Thunder Emperor. She used the spell, level 6 Ultimate Circle of Flame, Explosion of Flame. The main character used the same protective spell as the demoness. The girl proudly declared that she was the first one to whom the Thunder Emperor personally taught his magic, and for her this was the greatest honor. The boy laughed, noting that this was the first time since his reincarnation that he had seen such well-honed 6th-level magic. The demoness, not hearing his words but noticing his smile, asked how he could smile knowing that she was his opponent. The guy noted with slight surprise that she seemed to have already mastered the next level of magic. His rival used the 6th-level spell, Ultimate Circle of Flame, Explosion of Flame. Normally, it takes time to master the second highest level of magic. However, Merlin, by honing his Thunder God Master techniques, can reach the highest level of ultimate magic without a spell. Alcott confirmed that he knew about it. The girl had noticed him and was completely unprepared for what she saw. The guy added that he hadn't wasted any time either and had been training. Eftal used the 7th-level spell, Snow Blanket of Death, Ominous Frost. Merlin didn't expect the mage to prepare ice magic. Assuming that she would use my fire, the guy immediately decided to use attack after defense. Now he used the 7th-level spell, Ice Titan, Giant Ice Shard Attack. The ultimate levels of high magic without spells were the techniques that the protagonist developed to counter the other 4 emperors. Merlin was stunned, as the boy had created a new technique right after the evil frost. But for Alcott, this was just the beginning. The girl used a barrier to protect herself. The boy praised her for her excellent reaction, but warned that he would fight even faster. He used the Ice Titan spell again, but now there were several fragments. The demoness considered it impudent to use the 7th-level allegorical fire against her. To deal with all the fragments, Merlin put up several barriers in a row. Eftal was pleased with the girl's resourcefulness, but when all the barriers were destroyed, he created the last of the fragments and threw it straight at her. The girl, looking at the opponent's attack, realized that the mana mastery in this spell was much higher, and this meant that he was testing her, and for the demoness it was like an insult. For her defense, she put up a magic wall. Merlin was confident that her 7th level would be no less than his skill, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to hold back the ice attack, and the barrier began to crumble. The girl refused to accept defeat and tried her best to withstand the blow. Alcott hinted that her technique was too weak, and even with the same level of skill, she would not be able to stop his Ice Titan. The barrier was almost destroyed, and Merlin did not understand what her opponent was talking about. Merlin thought, feeling a strange feeling. It seemed like the guy was not just tracking her weak points in battle, but rather telling her what she was doing wrong, as if her own master was telling her that the demoness's technique was too weak. The girl concentrated and used the barrier, Perfect Wall, in double quantity. Such a powerful defense was still able to destroy the ice shard. Now Eftal was confused, as his former student was able to use the 7th level simultaneous summon. However, when a mage makes a simultaneous summoning, his consciousness is focused on constructing a spell. Therefore, one must never take one's eyes off the opponent. The boy asked her suggestively if her ancestors had taught her this rule. Alcott needn't worry, she had a great teacher. Merlin used the 8th level spell, Teleport. In the movements of the young man, the girl saw her master, and after using the teleport, she suddenly attacked the opponent. At first, the girl couldn't tell if the attack was successful because of the smoke, but later she saw that the radius of the attack was empty. Merlin asked sadly that even such tactics were nothing to him. The guy appeared behind her and confirmed her guess. Expecting an attack from behind, he was also ready to use teleport. The demoness only laughed at this. Seeing her master's technique, which she had honed for 400 years, lose to a young guy who uses the same technique. The girl should have been angry, but for some reason, Merlin sees a piece of her master in her rival and feels nostalgic. It makes her smile. The young man clearly misses his student and their training together, but the girl's question pulled him out of his nostalgia. The demoness was about to use her final secret technique, much to her opponent's surprise. If Eftal could endure it, she would meekly admit her defeat. Therefore, it would be easy for the boy to try to stop the attack. The magician liked that she had not yet given up. Merlin began to activate the spell, secret technique, 8th level, attack of the god of light, Thor's hammer. Alcott expected something more powerful than some Thor's hammer, but the girl seemed pleased that the guy underestimated her attack. The boy was still trying to figure out why she chose this spell. Even though her mastery of this technique was strong, it was still a normal attack. But after a few moments, Eftal saw that she was making a summoning with both hands at the same time. The young man realized that her secret technique was a simultaneous summoning, but he had already expected it and simply used a defensive spell. But after dodging 2 whips, Alcott barely managed to dodge the third. He is amazed that the demoness even uses her leg, because now it is a 3-way simultaneous challenge. The protagonist had to give it his all to expose. He could not imagine that she had such an ace up her sleeve. But, in an instant, Eftal notices something even more surprising. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. This was a 4-way simultaneous summoning of the 8th level. This was Merlin's secret technique. The main character began to laugh with happiness, because this was an incredible move from his student. Even in his past life, the guy had never seen something so incredible. A sweet child named Merlin. Since the Storm Emperor passed away, she has tried very hard for these 400 years. In that case, the young man must use his true strength to respond to several centuries of effort. As one of the emperors, the protagonist uses his 10th level spell, Eftal. Merlin began to concentrate magic. The guy also did not sit idle and began to activate his spell. It's clearly hard for the demoness to summon 8th level magic with all 4 limbs at the same time. Normal people barely remain conscious after the entire double simultaneous summoning, and yet she managed it. The girl started the attack and shouted that now the guy would try it in a quadruple size. Looking at his student, the protagonist realized that seeing her grow wasn't so bad. Alcott responded by activating the spell, Thunder Emperor. 2 lightning bolts collided in the sky and created a shockwave that knocked spectators out of the stands. Merlin realized that her spell had been absorbed. With a snap of his fingers, Eftal cast a magic cancel spell. His lightning, which had absorbed the demoness's attack, suddenly evaporated and the sky became clear again. Falling to the ground, Merlin caught her breath and began to reason that the colossal light attack that was able to absorb her level 8 attack. This is definitely level 10 Eftal. The guy instantly canceled the attack midway and redirected the light back into the atmosphere. The girl laughed. She felt awkward that she had so easily believed the story about the illegitimate son. After all, there was only one person in this world who could show such art. The real Eftal Alcott. Merlin asked excitedly if Eftal was the reincarnation of the Thunder Emperor. The guy did not expect such a direct question and thought before giving an answer. The guy asked with special warmth in his voice. It seems she finally figured it out. Merlin's words were stuck in her throat with happiness, but now she knew that she had been right all along. To which the guy gently remarked that, of all people, she knew him best, there was simply no other explanation. Merlin, after a moment's thought, sheepishly agreed that this was indeed the case. Alcott unceremoniously began to ruffle her hair to praise her latest secret technique. The youth added that the demoness's training without indulgence was an achievement. Merlin tried to say in a rush that the master had returned alive. They had met again, and she was able to hear these words from him. The words of the main character became her main reward for all 400 years without him. The magician wanted the girl to stop crying because she is no longer a child. The demoness was very apologetic, but she will forever remain a child for the Thunder Emperor. Suddenly, they heard screams. It turned out that it was Anastasia calling the master. Having caught her breath, the girl told the master that there was bad news. Merlin reacted ambiguously to the companion of her old acquaintance. She asked how it happened that Eftal had a maid as a student. The guy was confused, but explained that her name was Anastasia, and for some reason, he was taking care of her. Merlin is sure that there were some compelling circumstances for such a decision. A whole crowd of students came running and began to praise the main character. Someone suggested that he become a professor at the Kron Academy, and there were those who wanted to publish his magic only for the Scientific Society of Magicians. Alcott was scared and ran away, but he knew that after he had done something so huge, such a reaction was to be expected. Merlin caught up with Eftal and asked him why he had entered the academy. The only thing the boy could think of was to study magic at the Academy of Magic as a student. The girl understood and calmly suggested they could escape right now. The mage wanted to know where, but instead of a destination, Merlin simply replied that she had an idea. Anastasia wanted to go with the master and asked him to wait. This seemed strange because the girl ran ahead and Alcott could not keep up with her. Having run quite a long distance, they found themselves in a dense forest. The main character wanted to know how much longer they would have to get there, but the girl was sure that there was not much left. Stopping a few meters from her companions, she turned around and showed that they had already arrived. Eftal clearly recognized the place and was surprised to return again. Behind the wrought iron gates stood a luxurious estate. In a past life, the main character lived in this house with his student. After his death, she rightfully inherited it and has been looking after it for 400 years. The guy began to yearn for the past and remember warm moments. Merlin asked if everything was okay with Alcott. The girl said that until she finished the paperwork at the Academy of Magic, they could feel at home here. The guy asked again, confused, not quite understanding her intentions. In response, she only smirked playfully, stating that as the school's principal, she would use all her power to immediately transfer Eftal and Anastasia to her Altena Academy of Magic. The boy thought with delight about the prospect of transferring to the Altena Academy of Magic. Alcott joyfully exclaimed that he would now be able to continue his magical studies without hindrance. Merlin nodded, ensuring that the academy would provide him with all the opportunities he needed. Eftal warmly thanked his student and added that it was encouraging to have such an understanding director as Merlin. The girl asked to provide this to her. Thus, the main character and Anastasia began to live in this estate, which, in theory, is his home. Once all the transfer paperwork is done, they will become students at Merlin Academy. They even become the demoness's adopted children and personal apprentices. The boy was beaming with happiness when he came to the library and saw all his magic books. It's safe to say that she regularly and carefully cast a preservation spell on each book. It's a pleasure to think how well they've been preserved. Merlin sacrificed her time to take care of this mountain of books. The magician felt sad to think that this library contained so much knowledge that he had already begun to forget. But then he suddenly remembered. After all, now the main character has the opportunity to fight with the sword he always wanted to use. Without thinking twice, Alcott remembered that this weapon was kept in the treasury. A pair of friends set off to the treasury. On the way, they were met by a genie who mistook them for thieves and suggested that the team turn back. Eftal immediately realized that this was the guard Merlin had spoken of. The protagonist stated that he had come to collect his sword, Lightning Cutter, and suggested that his opponent step aside. Jin asked arrogantly how some thief dared not only lay claim to the legendary blade, but also do so in such an impudent manner. The guy was offended that the genie had called him a thief without any reason. The genie then continued that this sword was a legendary relic that one of the 4 emperors had obtained from the Demon King's castle. The blade was of SSS rank rarity, and such things were hard to find even if all the treasuries of the nation were searched. This is the sword used by the second demon, Generalissimo, of the Demon King's army. The protagonist remembers how panicked he was when that demon cut through his level 10 attack, Eftal, with a sword. It was a dangerous moment. The genie asked if they were Merlin's disciples. He then suggested that if they really knew what was best for them, they should pretend that they were just looking into the treasury out of curiosity and leave quickly. This treasure trove is inaccessible to anyone except the headmistress and the legendary Thunder Emperor. Eftal came there precisely because of these rules. But the genie yelled at the magician, forcing him to shut up. She turned around and started saying that apparently these two didn't understand the situation, or he should be more frank. The guy didn't understand what frankness had to do with it. Jin, speaking through clenched teeth in rage, said that until now he had shown leniency only because they were the favorites of that old witch. However, now his patience was at its limit, and he was ready to teach the magician a lesson, letting him know everything he thought of them. While the genie was screaming furiously at Alcott, he splashed him with his saliva. He then added that his patience with Merlin herself was also at its limit, and asked sarcastically if they wanted to know what else he thought. Jin had heard that Master Eftal was not very competent and had no magical abilities, which is why Merlin was full of suspicion in the beginning. And, in general, this master may have used machinations and not unreal power to achieve his title of one of the 4 emperors. The boy quietly asked where his lightning-splitting sword was. Jin didn't hear Alcott's words because he was laughing. The protagonist repeated his question furiously. The genie became worried, but desperately pretended that it was not so. He decided to take pity on the magician and pointed to the object he needed. The man mockingly warned the boy that all the treasures in this place had a no-touch spell cast on them. Ordinary thieves or wizards could not touch them. Eftal ignored his words and walked on. Jin didn't stop and said that it was all in vain. Only someone with at least the same level of magic as the headmistress could touch these objects. The protagonist used the 8th level spell, Perfect Dispersal. The spell used on the sword also affected the immunity spell. The man was hysterical and couldn't believe that the guy could dispel the magic. Meanwhile, Alcott was enjoying his sword. Merlin, in a rage, called the genie stupid. The man immediately panicked, screaming her name in fear. She angrily demanded to know who he dared to call a witch, since she could hear him even beyond the castle walls. At that moment, the swordsman noticed the girl and turned to her. Merlin instantly changed her anger to joy, greeting Eftal warmly. The girl gently noted that this is where it is, it turns out. The guy happily confirmed, remembering that he left his sword in this very mansion. When she asked him if Eftal had been trained in swordsmanship, the young man nodded modestly, while the genie pondered the name in confusion. This 8th level Perfect Dispel was instantly cast without casting a spell, and the mage spoke like the master himself the entire time. Jin finally realized who was standing in front of him. The man began to explain, in a panic, that he had absolutely no idea that the guy was a real Thunder Emperor. He apologized deeply for his many rudeness. Alcott said that everything was fine and added that he and Anastasia would be staying here, so he needed to remember their faces well. The girl greeted him shyly. Jin took his words into account, after which Merlin threatened that the next time he called her a witch, the demoness would wipe him off the face of the earth. Anastasia did not participate in the companions' conversation. All her attention was focused on the legendary sword. There was a knock at the door. The boy answered, and an anxious Merlin entered the room, asking if Eftal had a minute. He asked the reason for her visit, to which the girl sheepishly mumbled about a small problem that had arisen. Alcott asked what had happened, noting the excessive formality in her tone. The girl, slightly embarrassed, explained that she and Anastasia had recently taken a bath in a large bathhouse, and while washing, she had noticed something. Merlin, with concern in her voice, reported that the girl had a special mark of forced loyalty on her body. She expressed bewilderment as to whether Eftal intended to continue to keep her close, knowing of the existence of such a unique mark. The guy calmly confirmed that everything was exactly like that. The girl, after muttering something incoherent in confusion, collected her thoughts and said with alarm that it was not much different from carrying a bomb in her bag. Did Alcott really not understand the risks? This made the guy angry, and he responded sharply that her words were starting to irritate him. Eftal firmly stated that it was his decision. Merlin was at first confused, but then meekly apologized, admitting that the decision was not made by the young man, but by the Thunder Emperor himself. The magician knew exactly what he was doing. The next day, all the documents for admission to the Altina Academy of Magic were ready. It was Eftal and Anastasia's first day at Altina Academy. The demons were perplexed when they saw the main character because he was a human. Some were surprised that a demoness was walking next to him. Anastasia wanted to turn to Elcott, but he immediately answered that he already knew. It used to be a magic academy for humans, but as a result of the great war that broke out after the subjugation of the Demon King, this place became the territory of the demons, and now it is a magic academy for demons. So it's obvious that seeing people is strange for them, because they always knew that there were only demons in this territory. The girl thought for a moment and remembered what Merlin had said about it. By this time, they had reached their office. A sufficient number of demons had already gathered in the auditorium when the young man and his companion entered. The demoness was puzzled as to why the new student was a human, since humans were not very strong in magic. The other demon began to mock the swordsman. Listening to the unpleasant comments addressed to him, Eftal pessimistically assumed that this would be another problematic academic life. Under Merlin's supervision, Alcott and Anastasia entered the Altina Academy of Magic without any problems. The demoness noticed that humans weren't very good at magic, and now, it's the first day since they've been gone. The girl asked, slightly haughtily, if humans really weren't very good at magic, and the demon just laughed. The swordsman invited Anastasia to sit down. The student exclaimed with slight indignation that this was undoubtedly a human. Excluding the demonic girl, she did not understand why a human had been allowed here at all. The guy turned around and called out to Anastasia in surprise, but the girl was shaking in fear and looking indifferently at something or someone. Eftal asked about his friend's condition, but she brushed him off and said that everything was fine. One of the students wouldn't let up. She blocked the mage's path, wanting to know how he managed to get into the Demon Academy. The aristocrat turned to Maria and said that, judging by his appearance, it was very possible that he was someone very influential among people. He used the power of money to get an audience with the director, and he was pushed into the academy. A whisper went through the entire audience after the demon's words, and now, in the student's opinion, everything fell into place. The main character felt terribly uncomfortable, and he thought that the demon was not that far from the truth, so hearing this was a little awkward. The student asked if this dishonest man thought he could cope with studying at this elite academy, having entered the academy in this way. Elcott replied in a friendly tone that he would try. The demon didn't like the tone the swordsman was speaking in, and he muttered that the guy didn't dare answer him so casually, whether the mage had ever thought about what kind of exams with unimaginable passing scores the student had to pass in order to enter this institution. Does the newbie know that this is an academy for the elite, for the highest species like demons and elves? The management wants them to share a table, be friends, and study together with the human race, who can't even use magic properly. Such reasoning is incomprehensible to an aristocrat. The student decided to apologize to the main character for this performance. Well, the facts remain the fact. People are not respected in this academy. The girl herself does not differentiate by race, but she differentiates based on merit. After all, the boy won't be as good at witchcraft, so the girl suggested that he just avoid the other students. As they say, demons' achievements in witchcraft are much better than humans. In the past, comparing his brother with his second level of magic and Anastasia, who was able to conjure the third level, saying that she was not good at it, it seems that this fact has remained unchanged for the past 400 years. Merlin entered the classroom and announced that everyone should take their seats. Class hour was starting. Maria looked at the demoness with interest and wanted to know why she had come. Merlin decided that before introducing the new students, she should inform the students about the change of teacher for homeroom. The boy began to get very nervous at the sight of his former student. The demoness informed those present that from today on, she, Merlin Alcott, is the director of this Academy of Magic Altina. Will personally monitor the students' progress. The guy, sensing a catch, thought that this is what it had come to. Then one of the students said that they were supposed to be incredibly lucky to have Merlin herself teaching them. Someone else suggested that the woman must have already had a high status, since she became headmistress purely on merit. The demoness did not understand why one of the students stood up. The student said with playful gallantry that he had expected nothing less from Director Merlin. Since she had heard of such an outstanding student as he from other people, she had naturally come to give him personal instructions. The students responded to the situation with understanding. One of the girls said that everything was clear to her now. The guy noted that this was typical of Abe. Merlin, feeling awkward, apologized and inquired about the demon's identity. He introduced himself as Abe Marlin, who had received the highest grade in the entire class. The demoness thought for a moment, and then realized that this was Abe, the excellent student. Embarrassed, she said that, unfortunately, the demon was not the reason she was there. Then Merlin pointed at Alcott and announced to the entire class that he was the reason. The headmistress explained that she came today because of a special student who transferred to her academy. The whole class couldn't believe that this person was special. The boy hoped that his former pupil understood that she was only making things worse for him. Merlin indignantly asked that the principal had actually taken on the responsibility of holding the class hour because of this man. The demoness firmly confirmed that everything was correct. Meanwhile, the student looked angrily at Eftal and mentally resented his appearance. Abe exclaimed indignantly that, in his opinion, this guy was clearly the offspring of some influential person. Merlin wondered thoughtfully if he really looked like that kind of person. In response, the demon mockingly noted that he saw no other reason why such an incompetent person could be here. The headmistress stated that such stereotypical thinking made them third-rate wizards and told the group to listen to her words. She urged the students to watch Eftal more closely and learn from his experience. One of the students expressed extreme surprise, doubting the seriousness of her words. This will certainly provide those present with the opportunity to dispel any stereotypes they may have had in their heads about the human race. The guy felt very awkward and thought that Merlin was clearly trying to achieve something. The demoness, making a sweet expression on her face, coquettishly asked Eftal to be more gentle with them. This phrase finally finished off the guy. The mage thought that Merlin obviously had no plans to provide him with a quiet student life. At that moment, the bell rang, announcing the end of class. Abe aggressively asked who the other person actually was. Alcott answered hesitantly that even with that tone of questioning, he could only introduce himself as Eftal's friendly neighbor. However, the swordsman internally noted with disappointment that all of this happened solely because of Merlin's inability to keep her mouth shut. The demon angrily declared that since the director had described the interlocutor in this way, it meant that there must be something special about him, and demanded confirmation. Alcott replied in the negative, claiming there was nothing special about him. Abe just snorted and declared that he understood everything now. Merlin heard that old Merlin had started teaching magic to children as a volunteer, and rumor had it that she loved one child more than the others. He challenged her by asking if the main character was her favorite. The swordsman remained silent, and the group of bullies, believing in their victory, left. The boy couldn't accept the insult to his ward, so he turned to Abe with this thought. But the demon, grinning viciously, wanted to know if the swordsman had anything to say to him. The boy began to deny everything in fear. Eftal felt uneasy because they were laughing at him at the next desk. Finally, the bell rang. The second period began. Merlin made sure everyone was listening and announced that she wanted to use this lesson to decide who would represent the class at the Academy tournament. The board read, "Election of the Knight Representative for the Academy tournament." The students fell silent, and the main character became interested in the idea of the tournament. Altina Academy is a pure meritocracy. A friendly competition is held once a month and serves as an important system for separating the classes, and 5 representative knights are chosen from each class, and they are separated every 4 months. Naturally, the division of classes is also based on the students' grades, so everyone tries very hard. The headmistress noted, a little hesitantly, that apparently they had not yet chosen a representative knight. Eftal thought that it would be better for him to skip these elections, since during the competition his dark side comes out and he cannot control himself. The demoness asked with chagrin if they really didn't have a single candidate. Then she looked at her friend, but he had already hidden under the table. Merlin hesitated and asked if there was anyone brave enough among them. At that moment, the magician mentally begged to be ignored. The headmistress suggested that everyone present could either put forward their own candidacy or suggest someone else, and asked if they understood this option. Suddenly, Merlin stood up from his desk and turned to Merlin, offering his candidacy. Most of the class supported Abe's decision, since he is the best swordsman in the class. The protagonist was glad that he would not have to participate. The demoness expected something completely different, and so asked again if anyone else wanted it. A moment later, a shaking hand rises. The guy couldn't believe that Anastasia seriously wanted to participate. She was scared and tried to explain herself to the master. The girl wants to propose Eftal as a candidate, and this only made Merlin happy. Merlin was looking forward to it, because the situation had suddenly become seriously heated. The headmistress asked if they understood everything. The demon confirmed that he was ready to start at any moment. Merlin announced that students Eftal and Abe would be taking part in a practice match where the two would compete for the position of knight candidate and promised to choose the strongest. Elcott, in nervous thought, wondered how everything had turned out this way again. The swordsman thought that the situation seemed suspicious, because Anastasia was not one to act independently. The demoness warned that there would be no magic this time, and she would be judging solely on their sword skills. Merlin confidently told the man to prepare for defeat. At that moment, the girl announced the start of the duel. The demon attacked first, swinging epically, but the protagonist dodged it without any problems. Merlin shouted at the man to hold his sword tighter and asked indignantly if he thought he would agree to defeat an unprepared opponent. Their classmates began to cheer for the demon, shouting that he was fighting fair, which was what they expected of him. Meanwhile, Abe chuckled smugly, and Elcott thought that, clearly, his opponent didn't want to look like he could attack the weak. The swordsman came up with the perfect plan. Abe looks pretty strong, so Eftal will just fight in a way that everyone expects him to lose, and then he will be defeated and calmly lose the match. The magician moved to attack. In this case, the demon's pride and the protagonist's strength that Merlin wants to see will be appreciated. Having provoked his opponent, Alcott awkwardly dodged. The crowd cheered for Merlin. The swordsman reasoned in his head that he had managed to pretend that he had fallen for the enemy's counterattack. Eftal was counting on the fact that if he now made a very obvious feint, Abe would dodge it and thus unwittingly lead him to victory. However, doubt crept into his thoughts as to whether the demon would really be able to dodge at the last moment. Merlin couldn't dodge the blow, and the main character's brilliant plan collapsed. He took the full force of the blow, but still, it was just a feint kick. This attack shouldn't have hurt him much. Abe fell, which meant that the winner was student Eftal. The guy, shocked, mentally exclaimed that this could not be anything other than an open mockery. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was too unthinkable. But then Maria jumped out with her own proposal. Most likely, Director Merlin is thinking of how to improve the curriculum for the mage knights throughout the academy. The human race may be helpless in magic, but they are strong in close combat. That's why the best human swordsman was brought here. With his strength, it's understandable why he is treated so specially. Merlin chose this class for her experiment and became the class teacher to try to improve the Mage Knight program. Maria said she saw no other reason. Meanwhile, Alcott was musing that, although he had overheard the conversation, perhaps he should play along with what Maria was saying instead of interfering. At that moment, the girl turned to the magician, demanding confirmation that she was right. The boy hesitantly agreed, mentioning that Director Merlin had indeed spoken of something similar. In response, the girl exclaimed triumphantly that she had no doubt that she was right. By this time, Abe was able to rise to his feet. Merlin probed instead of striking and watched Eftal. The magician, humming a melody, continued to eat the meat until Anastasia muttered an uncertain appeal to him. The magician, without being distracted from his meal, questioningly inquired about the reason for her appeal. The girl hesitantly noted that the master was incredibly strong since he was able to defeat such a powerful opponent today. The guy outwardly agreed, but internally doubted it, believing that the victory was only due to the weakness of the opponent. The demoness quickly began to babble, asking what the master would do if he encountered a problem that could not be solved by brute force. Alcott, lost in thought, admitted that it was indeed a good question. If such an incident had happened, Eftal would still have tried to get out of it dry. Anastasia laughed quietly, because this was exactly the answer she expected from someone so strong. This was clearly not what the mage was after. The demoness was interested in whether his fate had been tragic and inevitable. He would still have stuck to his opinion. The protagonist competently agreed. Alcott stated that his current actions were an attempt to circumvent the inevitable, which is why he ended up at the Altina Academy of Magic. The girl noted that the master was truly incredible, and added that they were too different. Eftal sheepishly objected, claiming that this was not true at all, but then, in the ensuing silence, he thought that until Anastasia herself asked for help, he should not interfere. Anastasia thanked the master, but added that she was still only a servant, and expressed bewilderment as to why he allowed her to enter the academy, after which she apologized. The guy calmly objected that for him she was not a servant or anything like that. She just needed to remain herself and not worry about anything. The girl, however, continued to insist on her uselessness, claiming that she was unable to do anything for the master and probably could not stay without being able to repay his generosity. The girl stood without clothes. The guy, clearly embarrassed, loudly protested her actions, insisting that there was no need for this. Anastasia tried to object, but Eftal interrupted her, explaining that he understood her gratitude, but she should not attach so much importance to his status as a master. He added that it was quite enough for him to simply eat with her and see how she enjoyed the food. The demoness, shocked, mentally noted that the master, it turns out, needed so little. The guy wearily offered the girl something to eat. She wanted to say something, but Elcott drew her attention to the cooling meat. The demoness agreed and thanked the master. Anastasia noticed that the meat was very tasty. The guy happily said that meat lifts everyone's spirits. The next day, several artifacts were stolen from the treasury, including the lightning-splitting sword. Merlin noted that the genie seemed to have deliberately turned a blind eye to this, considering that it was only about Anastasia. The genie, in tears, apologized for what had happened. The headmistress added that the girl then disappeared and suggested that her unusual subordinate mark was a thief's variant. Alcott nodded in confirmation, explaining that the activation of a secondary mark located underneath the original one was likely what caused the effect. There are certain rules for service mark contracts. Even if someone has a service mark, they can't be ordered to do anything. They can't be forced to do anything illegal or dangerous to their lives. However, there are dark arts that make this possible. One such mark is an unusual service mark. Previously, when the Thunder Emperor was still alive, even putting such a mark on someone was considered a crime. Merlin asked him directly about his plans. Eftal explained that he had initially taken her in expecting this outcome, emphasizing that endless regrets would solve nothing. The girl asked again what decision he was talking about, and asked with bewilderment whether this was what he was thinking about right now. The guy confirmed that she had directly grasped his thought. The demoness reacted with extreme surprise. The protagonist is going to break this unusual service contract. The girl noted with concern that he must understand the consequences, since a service mark contract could not be terminated like a normal business agreement. The guy assured his girlfriend that he knew. Usually, service marks are divided into two categories: hard workers and sociable people. Literally, they're just business contracts for hired labor. These service marks are just a measure to keep them from running away. However, unusual service marks are a completely different story. The spell of unusual service marks is protected by the power of a contract called Kami. Merlin assumed that Eftal was planning to challenge the contract monsters. One day, such a contract was broken and the small country was exterminated by the Kami. Alcott acknowledged the difficulty of what lay ahead, addressing Merlin. She, in turn, asked why he would go so far for Anastasia, since she, in essence, had betrayed him. The guy replied that it was the same when he took in the girl herself, and since he was looking after the demoness, he was obliged to take care of her until the very end. Besides, this girl is not the type to betray a loved one without hesitation. The main character simply cannot leave her alone. Merlin, after thinking it over, admitted that such an act was entirely in keeping with his nature. Afterwards, she asked Eftal if he had any guesses about the girl's current location. The young man replied that, having foreseen such a development, he had cast a tracking spell on all these treasures in advance. She may be taking trophies to her true owner. Full of determination, the friends set out to return Anastasia. Abe admitted that she had done a good job this time, expressing his admiration, especially for the fact that she had managed to get Merlin's treasures and even the man's sword. The girl timidly thanked him, to which he confirmed with a characteristic chuckle that Anastasia had indeed shown herself to be the best. Merlin was surprised to see her as a student. The girl tried to say something, but the demon ignored her and continued, noting that she had nevertheless delivered to him the lightning cutter, a sword that had belonged to the demon royal family centuries ago. The entire Edwards family treasure paled in comparison to this ball. The guy had praised her, but it hadn't done her any good. But right now, Abe had something more important. The demon wanted to know if Anastasia knew that the man had such enormous power. The girl could not tell him anything, but Merlin wanted her to convince the swordsman to fight him in a trial match. The demoness tried to warn Abe about the enemy's strength, but the guy, without letting her finish, abruptly threw her into the wall and rudely ordered her to stop whining and follow orders. He demanded confirmation that she understood him. Anastasia meekly agreed, although she was internally worried because she tried to convey to him, but Merlin did not even try to listen to her. The demon, seeing her broken look, calmed down and was now ready to listen to her. Anastasia sheepishly mumbled that everything was fine, admitting that she had not expected such strength from Eftal. Abe thoughtfully replied that he understood her. The girl insisted on the main thing, and the demon was ready to listen to her for a while. Then, stammering, she asked if he really would stop after that. Merlin reproachfully noted that she could have been less forthcoming in her reluctance to serve his Portes family. The girl began to stammer an apology, admitting that the situation was far from ideal. The guy interrupted her abruptly, asking why not actually. If you take the artifacts that Anastasia's older sister stole for Abe and add the legendary sword to them, it will be under the ratio of 5 artifacts of each generation. Apparently, with this, the terms of the contract for her generation were fulfilled. The demoness had already managed to rejoice. But her special service mark, that's a completely different story. A special service mark placed by the Branov family, the famous elf killers, cannot be destroyed. If Anastasia has a child, then his generation will inherit the mark and the cycle will repeat itself. The guy praised the demoness once again. Tonight, Merlin will get a report on which the future fate of the girl and her father will depend. She needs to wait until the morning. And as a reward, Abe allowed Anastasia to stay in his mansion today. The girl asked him again about the overnight stay. After the demoness stole the lightning cutter, she cannot return to another master. The girl should not be modest, because this is her reward. Anastasia said words of gratitude. The girl admits that she doesn't know how many times she's been here. When she'll finish her thief work or report on the progress of the case, the maid offers to use the room. She says that she always comes back here, feeling disgusted and sick, but the girl feels especially bad today. Anastasia lies on the bed and thinks about how she betrayed Eftal Sama. We are talking about something that happened 8 years ago. It is mentioned that the little girl is the second daughter of the Branov family, Anastasia, and she is 7 years old, and about the first daughter of the same family, Tatiana, who is 17 years old. The girl says that she had an older sister who was 10 years older than her. The girl complains that her older sister always speaks rudely. Tatiana accuses her younger sister of being of no use to anyone and of taking her mother away from her. Anastasia remembers that their mother died a few days after her birth, as her sister said. The man calls out to her and says that she is causing trouble again. It is reported that this is the father of the Branov family, Ivan, 58 years old. Tatiana says that it is not much, but asks to add to the family fund. The father apologizes and says that they used to be of noble origin and he brought her many problems. The younger sister says that the house has been empty for 6 months and asks the older sister if this is all she can bring. She adds that her sister is dressed in expensive clothes. The heroes report that if it weren't for Anastasia, that would be enough and ask to get out of their village. The girl expresses irritation and says that if her sister does not want to see her, then she could have stayed away from home. The younger sister remembers that her sister did not help with the fields and came home once every couple of months. She thought that her sister was shameless and heartless and says that she hates her. Tatiana says she's leaving. Anastasia says she'd better never come home. She remembers how her older sister's eyes looked lonely back then and mentions that 5 years have passed since then. Anastasia expresses alarm and surprise when they notice her older sister Tatiana. They ask her what happened. The boy's name is reported to be Abe, she is 12, and the man's name is Shapiro. He is the head of the Portes family. The boy asks his father if this girl will be next, he confirms. Anastasia asks her father what is going on. The Branov family confirms the words of the young master and asks to take the younger daughter instead of the older daughter. Abe says that's cruel. Shapiro is adamant that they should begin the initiation ceremony as soon as possible. The girl tries to stop what is happening and expresses concern for her sister's hand. The Portes family explains that this is a special mark of service. He says that the elder sister made a big mistake in fulfilling the terms of the contract, and therefore she will become a special servant of the Portes family in place of her sister. Anastasia expresses surprise and asks what they are talking about. The man says that the terms of the contract are simple. He mentions that 5 artifacts must be brought from each generation. This contract is passed on to all subsequent generations until the end of time. Abe explains that he will need to infiltrate rich people as a servant and steal something from them that is terribly valuable to them. He continues that magical items called artifacts. The boy says that the older sister got them 3 items, and now they need to get 2 more. He emphasizes that failing the task is no longer an option. The girl expresses grief and says that because of this, her older sister failed the task. Her father apologizes to her and to Tatiana. She admits that then she learned the whole truth. It is said that the ancestors of the Branov family once began a confrontation, indiscriminately robbing and breaking family ties. This happened 300 years ago, when they tried to take over the territory of the Portes family. It is reported that the Portes stopped them because they were elite mage knights. It is said that the Branovs were dealing with each other out of greed, and as punishment for their robberies, they were forced to accept a contract that would give them the mark of service. Anastasia believes that the older sister knew about this contract and bore the cross of family service and deliberately behaved in such a way that the younger sister would hate her. The girl expresses regret and asks for forgiveness, saying that she did not notice her older sister's feelings. She admits that 3 years have passed. Anastasia thinks about the 3 artifacts for which her older sister gave her life and 2 more stolen by her. Anastasia believes that now the conditions of the contract have been fulfilled and they will now be released from it. The hero explains that in order to break this cycle of contracts, she must end her life. But due to the special magical power of the mark that binds her to the contract, she cannot do this. Therefore, if she does not give birth to a child, the contract will end. The man asks if the girl is sleeping. The girl asks what he means. He tells her that 5 artifacts, received personally from her, are needed to complete the contract. She says he has never said anything like that before. The hero claims that she has no choice but to obey, as she bears a special mark of service. He adds that his father said that no one can be freed. Abe continues to say that if she brings the other 3 artifacts and gives birth to the right men, then she will be released. Anastasia asks why her sister committed suicide. The girl explains that her sister thought that by fulfilling the contract, she would achieve freedom. She says that she served them faithfully and asks what these feelings mean to them. The hero expresses contempt and denial, saying that he does not care about those who are being asked about. He decides to tell the truth. Abe explains that the story he is about to tell will be the beginning of the entire current situation. He claims that history is actually the complete opposite of reality and admits that their ancestors staged everything. The guy says that they have taken over some of the lands of the Branov family, relatives of the Demon King. He mentions that their ancestors sentenced the heroes for the fights between their people and turned them all into special servant thieves to serve them for generations for 3 centuries. The girl realizes that they were all deceived from the very beginning. The hero comments on the reaction of the servants when they learned the truth and considers it simply amazing. He laughs loudly and notes that her older sister had the same silly face. Abe is delighted and says that Tatiana couldn't accept reality and just left. And he thinks that while she has this special servant mark on her, she will have to return to him at least once every 6 months. He states that no matter where she goes, she still won't be able to escape. A group of people notice a girl wandering alone at night and warn her of danger. They ask to play with them for free until they get tired, and they say that they won't do anything bad to her. The guy suggests they have some fun and then he'll let her go. Some say it's a reward for good people. The girl expresses irritation, believing that she can neither commit suicide nor escape due to the cursed special mark of the servant. A group of people are pushed aside. A young man with black hair says that this is his companion. Anastasia thinks that it is the master. The hero expresses irritation and demands that everyone disappear from his sight. The master calls the girl and asks why she took the lightning cleaver and didn't say anything about it. The girl confesses that it is all because of the special servant mark that is on her. The boy says that she did not understand him and asks why she never told him about this mark. Anastasia explains that the special slave mark cannot be removed, even if she told Eftal Sama everything. She explains that the servant's contract is created by this mark and it is irreversible, so nothing can be done about it. The master asks the girl what she thinks he is. The hero declares that he is Eftal Olcott, causing surprise in the girl, and asks her again what she sees when she looks at him. Eftal says that one should not judge him based only on knowledge about him. Anastasia expresses shock upon learning the hero's different levels and abilities. He assures the girl that he accepted her and knew about everything, so he will definitely cover for her and she cannot worry. The girl calls the guy and says that she can't do this anymore. She asks for help. The hero offers to take on the solution to the problem, confidently declaring that he can handle it. The bespectacled elf expresses admiration, saying that he expected nothing better from the Portes family. He confirms that it is indeed an impressive sword, worthy of being a national treasure. Abe reports that they are of the noblest and highest rank, so such things are quite commonplace for them. The hero asks how much another character can offer for the item. The second character offers 1,000 gold coins, but the hero refuses. The elf in glasses offers 5,000 gold coins. The guy agrees to the deal, and they agree on a sum of 5,000 gold coins. The buyer says that he does not have such a large sum with him now and will return as soon as he has. The young man notices that he has 5 more of the same valuable items. Abe notices that she came back rather quickly and says that no matter where the girl goes, she can't escape. He asks if she has accepted the reality of the situation. The girl asks to return the item. She emotionally tells him that the sword was Eftal Sama's and asks for it back. The guy asks her to repeat what she said. It is reported that a few hours earlier, the heroes were standing on the street. The guy said that he understood and grasped the essence of the situation. He says he will go and quickly return the lightning-splitting sword. The girl is asked what she is doing and is told that she is untalented. Anastasia asks the hero if he is angry with her. She confesses that she stole the master's sword and betrayed him. The guy asks her if she did it because she wanted to. The girl is surprised and says that this is not what she wanted. She explains that she cannot escape her servant mark, and therefore she cannot have her own thoughts or will. The hero wonders if this is really true. He notes that although her sister could not resist the servant's mark, she still survived to protect Anastasia. Anastasia agrees and says that her sister continued to resist. She admits that she kept reproaching her older sister, that all she did was run away from her own destiny. The girl says that she was wrong. The heroine says that now she understands the meaning of the master's words. The guy told her that she can refuse everything that she does not like. The girl says that she has understood the importance of having her own opinion and can refuse something if she doesn't like it. She says she wanted to ask him for something. The young man asks what she wants to ask him for. Abe orders the heroine to try to repeat the phrase she said earlier. Anastasia asks to return the katana to Mr. Eftal. The guy asks if he wants the katana back, and asks since when she became so brave and if she understands what they do to servants who argue with their masters. The hero wonders if she is prepared to be quickly replaced when another successor appears. The young man says that he doesn't like Anastasia's face and asks if she wants to suffer. The girl reflects that she is no longer going to run and that she makes the decision herself. She firmly declares that from this moment on she will no longer obey him. Abe says he doesn't know what the lower class told her and warns the girl that she must be prepared. He says she is stupid and asks what she will do if she continues to rely on people from the lower classes. The hero mentions that it is necessary to think about what seals of service can put on it. The guy asks if she still continues to argue with him and how long she plans to remain stubborn. The young man declares that such a stupid servant who does not know his master needs to be taught a good lesson. He tells her not to worry and he will stop before she ends her life. Abe says he'll get rid of that nasty face first. Eftal Sama reports that Anastasia did a great job. The girl wants to ask the master for something and admits her guilt in the incident. She expresses a desire to atone properly and asks not to interfere. The hero calms Anastasia, saying that she has already atoned for her guilt enough. The heroine apologizes to the gentleman for her actions. Abe expresses irritation at how Eftal has unceremoniously invaded the territory. He expresses anger, saying that Anastasia is his servant and that they came just in time anyway. He threatens to deal with them. Eftal sternly warns him never to dare anything again. He angrily continues that he should not raise his hand against his Anastasia. The hero notices with surprise that this is not the first time, and how dare he do this to the great him. The guy indignantly asks how he dares to hit him. He reminds them that they can't just leave here after everything that happened and asks if they understand where they are now. The hero states that this is his estate, which belongs to the magical aristocratic family Portes. He points out that the heroes have invaded his domain without permission and threatens that he can order his 300 guards to deal with them without consequences for himself and nothing will happen to him for it. Abe calls out to her immediately and she appears in front of him. He asks them how they can do that and tells them that this is what it means to use money to its full potential, and he tells them that there are hand-to-hand-to-hand fighters and skilled swordsmen among them. He says that they are the best and that the heroes won't be able to stick their arms and legs out of here. The young master of the Portes family calls on his professionals to deal with these uninvited guests. The main character voices over and says that he uses a level 7 magic called Sword of the Supreme King of the Wind God, and says that everything will go his way. Ave asks what he decided to hit with his magic. He asks not to make him laugh, and says that Eftal meant to say level 1, not level 7, and while he is sorting out his spell, his people will already have sorted it out. The guy is shouting about his estate. The hero expresses surprise and irritation and asks how he dared to do such a thing. The girl gives the sword to the master and thinks that she is very sorry. He asks if the girl feels a little better after he helped her. The guy asks if this is the land that used to belong to her ancestors. She confirms and thanks him for his help. Ave asks if they think they have defeated him and if they feel like they are forgetting something. He goes on to say that Anastasia is a servant, and as long as she has the mark of a servant on her, she will never be free. The main character declares that he doesn't have to worry about it. He will now forcibly free her from this curse. Another character laughs and asks what he's talking about, and asks if the hero has any idea how such a servant contract works. He explains that if he forcibly releases her, a bot and a similar divine contract beast will appear in this world to punish him. The girl's name is said to be Merlin. She reports that, as expected, all of their stolen items were sold in full. The girl says that she managed to find out a lot about the Portes family. She mentions that there are many bad rumors about them, such as selling artifacts to smuggling illegal drugs, and that they have very close ties to the local mafia. Eftal wonders how many mafia members were among those guys. Merlin expresses regret that student Ibu does not meet the requirements of their academy, so he was expelled. The protagonist asks to get to the main point. He says he will start right away. Anastasia clarifies that he will start. She is surprised and asks if they are really going to forcefully remove the curse from her. The girl asks, "How can you do this to an ordinary person? It's not some ordinary thing." He continues to say that it's a magical contract and it goes like the root of the social system. Anastasia says that only a miracle can forcefully break the contract. Merlin asks what she is chatting about. She says that Eftal-sama and she, who will help him, are with them. Therefore, in this situation, there is no need to even hope for a miracle, since everything will work out for sure. And she asks if Anastasia understood this. The girl confirms that this is indeed the case. She believes that in this world, only he can defeat the gods. The protagonist says that from now on, they begin preparations to lift the curse and ask for help. Anastasia agrees. The guy offers to remove the servant's seal by force and deal with the god. It is said that gods are spiritual beings who feed on human envy and fear. In one island state, there were gods who kept people in fear, and one wizard from the island offered the gods to become monster protectors of human contracts. It is reported that from that day on, the contract system began. People began to fear the gods who came for those who violated the contracts, and this fear made the gods even stronger. Now this power has become so great that even an entire country cannot resist it. The hero apologizes to Anastasia for being so quick and says it's time to start. He says she'll be a little cold, but she has to be patient. Anastasia notices that this place is huge. The guy says that no one knew about the existence of this place under the mansion. Eftal says that this place was used by the 4 great emperors. He says that here, they created a long-lasting magic protection circle of the 10th level. This dungeon was a place of training for the most outstanding wizards from all over the world. The girl expresses surprise upon learning about the creation of a protective magic circle for the 4 emperors. The master explains that this place will not let any magic or spiritual beings through. He believes that this is the perfect place to forcefully remove the seal. Anastasia reports that she has completed her preparations. Merlin also reports that everything is ready. The guy says that the outline of the coat of arms of forced liberation is also ready. He tells Anastasia that she must be ready, and they begin the process of breaking the curse. The girl expresses confidence and readiness, stating that she relies on him. The hero announces the beginning of the procedure for freeing himself from the curse. The girl happily declares that the servant's seal is disappearing. The hero says that this is not the end yet, and he says that the most important thing is about to begin. Anastasia notices a huge shadow and asks if it is really that, and mysteriously falls silent. Eftal confirms that everything is under control. He announces that he will activate the 7th level of super magical defense, which is called Four Spirits, the greatest defense circle. The protagonist orders Marin to immediately take Anastasia and run away from here. The girl agrees. The guy is sure that the enemy is now very angry, since they forcibly broke the contract. The girl exclaims in surprise that this is the beast of the contract. Marin confirms that it is one of the sacred beasts that once raged in the east of the island nation. It lives one level above humans, in the spiritual territory. The dragon is said to be called Seryu. The dragon asks if this is the guy who forcibly erased the contract seal. The hero confirms and admits that he hasn't liked this contract situation for a long time. Eftal stands in a threatening pose in front of Seryu. The enemy says that the hero should be praised for his courage and behavior towards the battle, if only all this happened due to his ignorance. The dragon continues to say that the contract ritual has been widely known to everyone since ancient times, and knowing at the same time that it will be necessary to make us an opponent, possessing an incredibly huge amount of magical power, is equivalent to the end of life. Seryu says that ignorance is bad, and even if the hero begs for mercy, it is too late. The main character asks to remove his stinking mouth. God laughs and says he is interested. He wonders what such a little man can do against him. Eftal asks the dragon again what he can do and demonstrates it. It activates the 7th level of Evil Outbreak, which is called Demon Lord's Scorching Heat. The hero activates the 7th level of the Wind of Chaos, which is called the Supreme King Wind God Sword. Next, the guy uses the level 7 Ice Titan, which is called Giant Ice Flow Attack. Marin notices that 3 spells in a row and all hit the mark. She says that, as expected from Eftal-sama, everything is amazing, that even Seryu is unable to put up any resistance. The dragon says that he understands everything. The enemy asks the man if he is a mage, and he is surprised that who would have thought that in this generation there would be people who could use magic. He admits that he is a little surprised. Eftal understands that it is impossible to defeat the dragon just like that. The heroes notice that there is not a single scratch on the dragon, despite all the attacks. The protagonist says that it's all about his scales. Marin asks again about the scales. She understands that the patterns on the dragon's scales are not just decorative, but have special meaning. The girl understands that the patterns are the same as on the walls, and that on each dragon scale there are patterns of magical protection against spells. She concludes that his scales are capable of neutralizing magic. The hero confirms her words. Eftal expresses satisfaction, saying that for 400 years there has not been such an opponent who could amuse him even a little. The girl thought with surprise about the 400 years she heard. The dragon addresses the hero, calling him a man, and when he learns that magic is useless against him, what he intends to do. The guy replies that it is obvious and takes out his sword. He claims that he will show how an ordinary person fights. The enemy laughs and asks what the hero can do with this piece of iron. The young man replies that he already said that he can show him. Seryu decides that he will show him how much the god's power surpasses that of humans. The dragon activates Sacred Divine Enhancement. Eftal repeats about the Sacred Divine Enhancement in surprise. He reflects that even with a strengthened body, he could barely dodge the dragon's attack. The master understands that this speed must be due to the patterns. The divine seals on his body have strengthened him many times. The hero thinks that in a past life he could have absorbed this power. The blonde boy asks Eftal to listen to him and says that taking heavy attacks face first is extremely stupid. He explains that they must be parried and that one must go with the flow, like a leaf floating down a river. Eftal reflects on the need to parry heavy attacks. The dragon demands that the hero stop bothering him and asks what he is going to do with his speed. The guy remembers what they told him about speed. The bald old man notices that the movements of the hero's legs and bodies are very different from each other. He says that although he loses to the guy in speed, there is one thing in which he does not lose to him. The man continues to explain that with small steps he can close the distance very quickly, that it is almost the same as dancing. Eftal laughed and said that Director Moria dances. He asked not to laugh. The hero claims that he can quickly cover the distance with small steps. Seryu indignantly asks how a person who jumps back and forth can keep up with his speed. The dragon is surprised that the boy managed to move as fast as he did despite using divine enhancement. He asks that he can also use the Sacred Divine Enhancement. The young man explains that, yes, something like that, but half, because he had to use one forbidden method. His current enhanced form is obtained from the techniques of his two masters, and in addition, magical power, becoming the strongest level. The hero says that the most important thing is beginning. It is reported that the diagram indicates that body enhancement usually does not show any special effects, and the concentration of magical power in parts of the body allows one to temporarily strengthen oneself. Eftal admits that he simply poured magical power into his body, similar to his technique. However, controlling the flow of magical energy to strengthen the body in battles has its own delay, and adds that in the end, he definitely will not win. He asks the dragon what he thinks would happen if someone else could control his magic control. Sorcerer asks that he wants to let someone else do it. The protagonist says that he has a favorite student, and he gave control of all his magical power via brain link to his student, and all that remains for him is to control his body and mind. The guy claims that he can use powers of the same level as his. Anastasia says that this is amazing and that it was to be expected from the master and Marin-sama. She remarks that they will be able to defeat a god at this rate, and expresses surprise at this. The dragon notices that there is some kind of person there. He categorically denies admitting anything and says he will never admit it. The hero says that he can admit it or not, but these are all human techniques, and he calls Merlin to action. Sorcerer calls the hero an impudent man and threatens to rip him apart and eat him alive. The dragon states that the man is stupid, and did he really think that he could defeat him with this toothpick? He states that he has thought of something, and he incinerates it with thunder. The enemy activates Thor's spear level 9, which is called Thunder God's Mad Dance. The protagonist laughs at the idea of using a thunderstorm against him, the god Emperor of Thunder. He says that this is just in time, and promises to teach what real thunder is. Eftal announces that he will show what real thunder looks like from a man who has been dubbed the god Emperor of Thunder. The dragon notices something coming and wonders why he is absorbing all the lightning he summoned. He asks what kind of abnormal lightning this is and says that it can't be. The hero states that it is correct if he says that the one who decided to break the contract is none other than the god Emperor of Thunder. Sorcerer asks in surprise that it is Eftal and asks where he is aiming. The enemy wonders if he is really going to use this sword as a lightning rod, and he says no. The protagonist activates level 10 magic power called God Emperor of Thunder.